you want to start playing Genestealer Cults? Well, I have a video dedicated to the model part of that, but understanding the faction and the rules and what combos together is what this video is all about. Well, this has been a very long project, and I have given a lot of separate advice on all the different units of the Genestealer Cult Index, which will be good for at least 6 months, probably longer, but some of that has become outdated with the many balance patches of early 10th edition, which continues to be released. And the rules have been clarified one way or another, and I have done a lot more gaming and found more combos of units and abilities. So this isn't just a compilation of all my Genestealer Cult videos. Many parts have been re-recorded, some parts have been cut out, and I will be here after each detailed analysis with some quick thoughts and minor clarifications. So if you are new to Genestealer Cult, this is a great place to start. For long-time viewers, there is new advice that you won't have heard before, and this isn't the end. I have many more Genestealer Cult videos in the process of being made, all about army-wide tactics, different playstyles, and the psychology of playing Genestealer Cults. Genestealer Cult are not the easiest army to start with, though compared to the previous editions, they're much easier in 10th edition than any other time, so now is a good time to get into them. I should also mention that throughout this video I will make references to several other videos, not compiled or remade here. They're linked in the description and as a pinned comment. And do be warned that as this video goes on, there will sometimes be background music, sometimes not, sometimes there will be subtitles fixed at the top of the screen, but not always. Change is scary because it just comes at you. But don't worry if things are a bit different as we go on. So let's begin with the most important character, as far as the cult is concerned, the Patriarch. Yes, it looks like our Messiah is a very cheap model. But does that mean it is points efficient or just plain bad? Genestealer Cult have a massive advantage in 10th edition of 40k, and that comes from one of our glaring disadvantages. The 10th edition of Warhammer 40,000 is all about pairing individual leaders to units to make them more powerful force multipliers, and knowing which leader to choose to go with which unit. Well, because the Genestealer Cult have such a tiny roster of units to pick from, the best unit to pair a leader with is perhaps the only unit that you can pair that leader with, the Patriarch, who really needs some Genestealers to go with him. The Patriarch does not have lone operative, so he cannot feasibly be deployed by himself. With 6 wounds and toughness 5, yeah, he's got some toughness on him, but 2 Terminators will do better. What he does have is the same as other Genestealer Cult units, Deep Strike, so he can appear on the board later on, but then we're looking at being 9 inches away. The other option is Infiltrate, so you can set up on the board already, and then you can get charged by the enemy the first turn when you don't get the dice roll going your way. We'll look at ways to deal with that in a minute. He has 5 attacks with these Patriarch Claws, and these retain the ability to reroll your failed wounds because they have the Twin Linked ability. There's 2 of them. They pair up quite nicely, and the other 2 are also there. 5 attacks. So 1 more than the number of arms he has. Hitting on 2, strength 6, -2 and 2 damage, you can cut your way through your points equivalent of Space Marines in one go, in theory. These abilities alone will not help the Patriarch do a lot, and you can't do multiple Patriarchs because he's an epic hero, so you only get 1 in your Genestealer Cult army. Kinda makes sense from the lore. Although we've also had cases where there's multiple Patriarchs and it was like a surprise, or like 2 cults merged together, obtain both Patriarchs rather than there being some kind of civil war thing. But the Patriarch needs Genestealers to protect him. Then he gets the ability to advance and charge, which is something you get from having the Genestealers, because then the whole unit has the ability to advance and charge. Remember, once you put a leader inside a unit, that is now a whole unit for the rest of the game. So he could advance and charge either from Infiltrate or from just being in the deployment zone and hiding behind buildings as you move up. Advance and charge, attack the enemy, and scare them away with Cosmic Horror, which is done at the start of the fight phase. Enemy units within 6 inches must take a battle shock test. This is very useful if you want to hit those Death Star balls that you know are going to pull a bunch of command point shenanigans. Once per game you can double the range of that using your Psychic Familiar, so you can have a 12-inch Fear Bomb. The effectiveness of that will depend on the leadership of the enemies and whether they've got commissars and things like that. For scoring the primary objective, the enemy will recover before objectives are scored at the start of their turn, but if you last long enough, you could use this Cosmic Horror in your fight phase so that the enemy are scared off objectives and you can control it at the start of your turn. And it's also very useful for controlling it for secondary objectives at the end of turns and things like that. Again, it's leadership dependent on how good the enemy is. Now, there's not a lot of great enhancements the Patriarch can take, but it doesn't matter. He's an epic hero. Page 56 of the main rulebook, epic heroes cannot have enhancements. So it doesn't matter that they're no good for the Patriarch, he couldn't take them anywhere. It also means that for your Crusade, you can't gain any XP. So if you had, from 9th edition, a leveled up Patriarch for your Crusade army, you're going to lose all of your bonuses. Really sucks. The Patriarch is cheap, and that is fair because it gets more from its bodyguard than the Genestealer bodyguard gets from him. The Patriarch gains advance and charge. The Genestealers do get devastating wounds ability, so that they actually have rending on their rending claws. But I think for Genestealers, you'll probably only see one unit of Genestealers because... Hi, it's me from the future. Ignore what this version of me is saying. We're the same person. Don't get confused by the two different outfits. He just said... I just said, you'll probably only see one unit of Genestealers with a Patriarch. Well, I just played against Dark Eldar, and 3 units of Genestealers, all infiltrating, all being able to charge on the first turn, is actually very effective for tying up all of the nasty things you don't want moving around and shooting you. So that's how you get to table someone by turn 3. Okay. Many Genestealers also works. Other schools of thought are available. 2 squads of Genestealers, 1 with Patriarch, and then also an infiltrating Abominant Aberrant team. This is also a good idea. Okay, I'll let him get on. Okay, you'll see me later. I'm sure that I'll get myself back at some point. Right, bye. We can only have one Patriarch. The Patriarch never comes back, and Genestealers don't easily come back with the faction rule, so they're not worth having compared to, say, Acolyte Hybrids with demolition charges. Pure strain Genestealers are not battle line. What a daft idea, having the unit that the army is named after as a core part of it. Ah ha ha ha! How very foolish of us to think that. They're different from the Tyrannid Genestealers because they have Infiltrate instead of Scout. And they're different from their 9th edition variant because they now have 2 wounds, which makes them more survivable to things like Overwatch and Flamers and stuff. The Pure Strain Genestealers also are now reduced to a 5+ invulnerable save. I think the extra wound kind of offsets that. The Genestealers and the Patriarch are a unit that is going to need support. If infiltration goes wrong, and the enemy has Flamers nearby, have a Primus, then you can redeploy that 1 unit of Genestealers and Patriarch, as well as 2 others. So we're definitely going up in the world. And not just because we're tunneling up from underground. Now, the decoys and misdirection ability for the Primus is a redeploy ability that comes after deployment, but before the first turn. So if you've deployed your Patriarch and Genestealers ready to destroy an enemy unit, and then the enemy has deployed some Flamers in front of it, use the Primus ability to either pull them back, put them into reserve to turn up by Deep Strike, or put several units that can infiltrate, say another unit using this enhancement, and put them all on one side of the board, far away from any nasty Flamers and the Overwatch ability. First turn strikes are going to be very effective for Genestealers, especially since people are used to, if they played against Genestealer Cult before, they're very used to us just basically skipping our first turn and waiting for the second turn before we can do anything particularly nasty. Our Glorious Saint Patriarch still has their pretty nasty claws, as do the Genestealers, with a very similar -2 AP, hitting on a 2+, and with their forearms giving 4 attacks. So that is how I would use the Patriarch and the Genestealers as part of a bigger Genestealer Cult army, and our Patriarch Saint can go on leading the cult. I did pop up and say, yeah, lots of Genestealers are quite a good idea. And since the Genestealer models have been around since 1st edition, they're the most accessible Genestealer Cult models to get. When you're deploying the Genestealers and the Patriarch, it is tempting to put them immediately infiltrating close to the enemy deployment zone so that they can't screen them out with other infiltrators of their own. However, if you do that, you don't know what's going to be in front of you. So you could just be facing down a tank or a lot of Flamers, something that automatically hits with Torrent, and so is great for Overwatch. And although I kept mentioning, yeah, AP -2 claws, but the strength 4 claws of the Genestealers are not going to get through the toughness of a lot of enemies. If you can hit somewhere straight away that the enemy is quite weak, you can clear the enemy from part of their deployment zone, and then your reserves can appear there from deep strike. Your enemy's deployment zone is now your deployment zone. Or, if you don't manage to kill an enemy and clear away part of the deployment zone, you can delay the enemy. A flank full of Genestealers is scary, and if the enemy can't kill them quickly, and this is unlikely with 2 wounds and a 5+ invulnerable save, you can hold up a load of their army as long as you're able to charge a large or valuable unit of theirs. And not a lot of opponents keep their valuable units like 6 inches into their deployment zone with a screen in front of them. So often, you're able to break through into those valuable targets. And even if the enemy predicts all of that and has the screen and has their best unit 6 inches behind, you can leave your Genestealers out of line of sight. Can your opponent afford to ignore those Genestealers and leave them behind as they advance, or they can try and spend their entire first turn trying to get rid of those Genestealers? Is the army that your opponent has then fast enough to compensate for the loss of a turn? Because they're not able to move past the Genestealers, they spend their shooting against the Genestealers, perhaps they spent their charge and combat against the Genestealers, and even if they wipe out all of the Genestealers, Grey Knights may be able to then recover from the movement loss and teleport to be where they need to be on turn 2. Necrons are usually not going to be. So the Patriarch can potentially use their psychic ability, which is currently their only psychic ability and isn't that great, but it can stop the enemy from using stratagems that would help them clear away the Genestealers. And as they're a character, the Genestealer Cult Patriarch can take advantage of Epic Challenge to get rid of enemy force multiplying characters like Apothecaries and Imperial Guard officers. They can do that quite comfortably with their claws. As a delaying tactic, the Genestealers are a great idea, but other than against very light enemies, they're not going to do some killing. The unit you want to do the killing are Acolyte Hybrids, and headphone users may want to turn down their volume a couple of notches. Now that I have your attention, now that I really have your attention, this is about the amount of explosions you can do with Genestealer Cult Acolytes. And also a bit of, just for good measure, this is not a mortal wound bomb. Games Workshop stops them. When our hated enemy, the Deathwatch, had that, in theory, it was doing like 40 to 100 mortal wounds. That was wiped out before 10th edition is officially launched. This is regular, high strength 12, -2 rend, damage 2, explosions. I see 2 ways of running the Acolyte Hybrids in 10th edition, and I encourage you to have at least 1 squad of each. Before explosions, first I want to talk about stabbing people with tiny knives. A gaggle gank, if you will. It's not about stabbing someone, but the idea of coming together as a group to stab someone in praise of the star gods. Acolytes come in squads of between 5 and 10, or from the points 5 or 10. It's not 15 as in 9th edition, and not 20 as in 8th edition. You could also get 12 Acolytes in a box set, Octadeath? No, Pentaslay? Overkill, that's right. It was called Overkill. And the Genestealer Cult Combat Patrol box also comes with a squad of 5. All of the different mining weapons are the same. It was a faff for people to keep trying to stay with the meta and have saws or cutters or drills to pierce the heavens. Well, now it's all just a heavy mining tool, 2 attacks, hitting on a 3, strength 10, -2 and 3 damage. I would say that's an upgrade on all of the different combat weapons you could have there. For the rest of the squad not equipped with mining weapons, and of the 10 of them, you can have 4 with mining weapons, the others have baby versions of a Genestealer Cult Claw. So 3 attacks for their 3 arms, whereas Genestealers have 4 attacks for their 4 arms. We hit on a 3+, strength 4 -1. The -1 is nice in an edition where having a -1 at all is getting a lot rarer, but the sheer number of attacks will help you take down enemies. And as vile insurrectionists, you always reroll 1s to hit, shooting or combat. 1 is the cult leader and they get 2 extra attacks at strength 5 -2 to represent the bone sword and lash whip, things like that. So they're pretty good in combat, although if they hit something that is extra tough, they will just slam into it and slide off it. That's happened to me quite a few times. Oh, look at that, first turn charge with some shenanigans in 9th edition. Not worth it. No. So you will have to play somewhat defensive with this unit. Hide it in a building or behind a building, block line of sight, and then charge. I think it's better to do that than risk getting that 9-inch charge when you come up from deep strike from underground. That's just personal preference though. You may prefer to go with 10 people attacking from underground and do it that way. Totally fine, entirely up to you. Since there's no advance and charge, an alternative is to give the Primus in the unit inscrutable cunning. So while the bear is leading the unit, they have the infiltrate ability. As long as you get the first turn, you'll be okay. You can then move out from cover and charge the enemy in the first turn. If you don't have a Primus, have a Locus in the squad with this ability, then if you don't get the first turn, you still have the fight first, assuming the enemy charges you and doesn't just shoot you off the table. As for characters to supplement them, the Primus is going to be the best one, because the Primus changes them from rerolling ones to hit to rerolling all failed hits. You don't want to be getting 1s and 2s when you're attacking with a strength 10 weapon. You want to be hitting with that, so that will very much help, and I recommend them as the best one to pair with your Acolyte Hybrids. Interestingly, the Primus is back to Toughness 3, while the first and second generation Hybrids went to Toughness 4 in 9th edition. They've retained that. Primus is back to Toughness 3. Doesn't matter, use the toughness of the bodyguard when you're being attacked. There are a few other leader options, potentially that you could combine with the Primus, but then we're making the squad very expensive. The Locus is a very good choice though. If you didn't get your charge off, either from deep strike or the enemy had something to attack you quickly before you could attack them, the Locus provides fight first to counteract that. So as you are the defending player, if the enemy charges you, you would go first with this fight first ability. And that is something you want, because these Acolytes are very squishy. Toughness 4 and a 5+ save with 1 wound, you will go down to the equivalent of tiny knives. The kind of tiny knives that we're bringing. As a fighter himself, the Locus is quite strong, much like the Acolyte Hybrid leader, but hitting on a 2+ rather than a 3+. That's pretty good even without a Primus, so I would recommend having a Locus if you have the model. And he works best with the Primus because then you get a 4-up feel no pain against all of those nasty sniper shots, and they would have to take out the Locus first. Bodyguarding within a bodyguard unit? Bodyguardception. That is how you could play this. You could include a Biophagus, and that could go with the Primus. That will grant you lethal hits, so on a 6 you automatically wound, and with the Primus rerolling all attacks, you could just keep fishing for 6s. Oh, you got a 3, that's a hit. But try again, see if it's a 6. I think the Biophagus though is best on a unit of Metamorphs, so if you have 1 Biophagus, put in with your Metamorphs, because the Metamorphs don't have mining weapons. Mining weapons being strength 10, you're pretty likely to wound against, well, everything. Wounding on a 2 or a 3+, I think you're okay, you don't need lethal hits. You could include an Iconward. Having a 5+ feel no pain will help your people stay in the fight a lot longer. But I think with his Summon the Cult ability, he's better off in the rear rather than being pushed up to the front with the Acolytes. So I would have an Iconward with the Neophytes, making a unit of Neophytes on an objective near invincible, but we'll get on to things like that. And his Summon the Cult ability can be done from anywhere. He doesn't particularly want to be in close combat when he's doing that. What about a Clamavus? MC Clammy V spitting out some sick beats? Well, the voice of new truths to make enemies subtract 1 from battle shock tests after your Acolytes have hopefully killed at least half of them. It's something. But the Scrambler Array is something you want in the rear to stop enemies being set up within 12 inches of a protected home objective. But if you have points to spend, get a Locus, not a Clamavus. Leave the Clamavus for the after party. You could have a Magus in your Acolyte squad, but that gives you a 5+ feel no pain against psychic attacks. The Iconward gives you 5-up feel no pain against all attacks. So given the choice, go with the Iconward. And last of all, you could have a Nexus, but again, I think they're very much a rear echelon unit, not wanting to be pushed up close with some charging Acolytes and dragged along for the fight. So just a Primus will do. Primus and Locus, just a Locus, or no characters at all if you want to go a little bit cheaper. That will work. and that will provide you a really good close combat unit outside of Genestealers themselves. The second way to field Acolytes is as a 5-man problem-solving demolition team. You can do amazing explosions with 5 of these models and 2 demolition charges. You don't even need to include hand flamers, they don't matter, but it's free, so why not? Every pistol is a flame pistol. Unless you are like me and believe in WYSIWYG, that is, what you see is what you get, and there has much more aesthetic beauty to have the pistol elegant rather than this chunky hand flamer. So you have 5 of them. Use the stratagem Tunnel Crawlers. 1 command point, you can be set up 3 inches away from the enemy. You can't charge, but we're not gonna charge them. We're not gonna leave anything left of them. So you're now in range with your grenades immediately after deep striking. And when I say grenades, I do of course mean huge demolition charges used for blowing holes in cavern walls. I wouldn't use the grenade stratagem. You would have to do that before shooting, and it might take away from your blast keyword ability on the demolition charges. So for every 5 models in the enemy unit, and pretty much all of them are in multiples of 5 for squad sizes, you get an extra hit on each of your demolition charges. So I wouldn't risk grenades, and it's also costing more command points on top of what you've already spent for tunnel crawlers. If you really did want to spend more command points, use a perfect ambush. It improves your ballistic skill by 1 point and the armor penetration. That will nicely offset that 5+ requirement to hit. So 2 demolition charges, getting an average number of shots, we're looking at 16 shots against a 10-man enemy unit. If you're hitting on 4s, that's 8 strength 12 minus 3 2 damage attacks. Kaboom! Now if you didn't want to spend 2 command points on this very effective tool, and that 5+ to hit is worrying you, don't worry. Be Primus. Add a Primus, and you're getting a little bit expensive for a one-off literal throwaway unit, but that would let you reroll all failed hits. Do remember that the team is getting a reroll to 1s on all of their hits anyway, and if the enemy is on an objective, and that is what you should be targeting with this squad, then you can also reroll 1s to wound. No support characters needed. Just blow away an enemy that's on an objective. So I recommend just a team of 5, then the 3 of them not armed with demolition charges can be bullet catchers for enemy overwatch, and if they don't die, then you have a couple of extra models with objective control too, if both of your demolition men blow up from the hazardous test they have to take after throwing those demolition charges. You could have a bigger squad of 10, and then include 4 demolition charges and a Primus. Then with these 2 stratagems, tunnel crawlers and a perfect ambush, you get at least, remember blast, 4d6 plus 12 shots, rerolling all hits at strength 12. Genestealer Cult are not meant to be that powerful, so just don't tell Games Workshop, or we will get nerfed very hard. But wait, there's more! We have the detachment rule, they came from below. So when you're set up as reinforcements, until the end of the next fight phase, and that includes your shooting phase, all of your weapons have sustained hits 1 and ignores cover. I think it's even more shots than that, depending on how many 6s you roll. And again, with the Primus, you can reroll any of your hits, not just the ones that failed. So you could fish for 6s if you really wanted. As the Venga boys said, boom boom, boom boom. I want you in my Genestealer Cult army. But that's getting a bit on the expensive side. Team of 5 does the job quite well for a third of the points of that 10-man plus Primus squad. If the models die from hazardous or from enemy shooting, then take off the ones that have used their demo charges. They count as dead. Now, rules as written, with your cult icon, you can restore D3 destroyed models to the bearer's unit. I don't think you get back your one-shot weapon in that case. So the demo charges will be gone. You are literally bringing back the same guy that just died, rather than someone very suspiciously similar coming on and going, "Oh no, my twin brother! I must avenge you!" Whatever size you pick, When they die, you get another squad as a token using the Cult Ambush ability. And they can then use the grenade stratagem or whatever you want. So, the never ends. Did I say the models die? No. My models don't die. Same guy, just the same guy getting back up. So if you are a 3rd generation neophyte and you wonder where your 2nd generation daddy is gone, he went out and came back with more demolition charges, which means that you have a very excellent tactic of having lots of small units with demolition charges. They throw it, they blow up, they get shot at and go for a sleep, and then go to the shops, get more demolition charges, turn up as a blip, and from that blip, once they're set up, move, advance, throw more demolition charges, because demolition charges are assault weapons. So it is the same guy, of course. The legendary heroes of the Genestealer Cult never die, but they do go out for more once per game demolition charges. So now the explosion train genuinely never ends. Get some demolition charge acolytes. I would say you're really getting your points worth, but demolition charges cost no additional points. I also wanted to quickly dispel another tactic I'd heard from Genestealer Cult players about returning models to a unit and then conga lining those new models onto an objective. Page 1 of the rules commentary, you set up models in coherency with models that were already on the board before you added any models. So you can't chain out new models you have deployed. If you had one neophyte left with an icon, the returning, let's say 6 models, would all have to be placed within 2 inches of that icon model, because that was the only model on the board when the call went out to bring on more troops. I mean, to get back up. If they're not on the board at the end of the game, then they must have just staggered back to base as the sun rises silhouetted against the light and give a thumbs up as the people crowd around and see their magnificent return against the odds. You are not allowed to die. You will always be needed. That's just a nice sentiment. But, just to quickly repeat, the cult icon does not bring back demo charges, but the unit dying and then returning with cult ambush, for rules purposes, it is a new unit. They do have demo charges, but I wouldn't expect too much from a returning unit. If you go first and they die in your enemy turn 2 from shooting, then they return in your opponent's turn 3, ready for your turn 4. But they will be out of position because they have to be at least 9 inches away from the enemy and probably want to be even more just to be safe. So unless you get a good advance roll, the demo charges are not coming back in any meaningful way. Better to just put the blip from Cult Ambush on an objective so that the unit can return and hold an objective. As the Acolytes are objective control too, this is a good place for them. When you are using the demolition charges, you need to pick your targets carefully. A group of 10 Space Marines is wonderful. An enemy tank, great choice. But if you're doing it against anything that has a rule that gives -1 damage, like the Redemptor Dreadnought, that's when you need the grenade stratagem instead, not the demolition charges. Also, don't use them against things that are 1 wound hordes, like 20 Termagants. That's a waste of a demolition charge. Go for some big monster, the biggest thing they have. Hordes are countered by Neophytes, which are next. But I first want to talk a bit more about the Locus. That is a Genestealer Cult character that nobody seems to be using. For many people, me saying, yeah, put the Locus in is a, are you sure? But for some few of you, it's a great opportunity to be smug in the comment section and be like, I use a Locus. It's a good character. The Locus is the cheapest character, at time of recording, and while against shooting armies, you will get shot after coming from reserve and using demo charges, but against combat armies like Orcs that we struggle with in the Ascension Day detachment, we can fight first and blunt or defeat their attack. Why do we struggle so much against combat armies? Our stratagems in the Ascension Day detachment are good for countering shooting. So one with darkness, so that we can just be totally untargetable for guns outside 12 inches. Or, if we're not in engagement range, which is where the combat armies would have us, then we can return to the shadows. So that's a good counter to the shooting-focused armies. So the Locus is great if you don't know what you're against, or you're fighting a combat-focused army like the Orcs or the World Eaters. As a tactic, but a pretty niche tactic, but also a very cheap tactic, give the Locus Focus of Adoration as an enhancement. This gives the unit a free heroic intervention. If you have the second turn in the game, Deep Strike with Rapid Ingress on the enemy turn, Assuming you survive and are out of line of sight of the enemy shooting, you can attack the objective. Your opponent isn't going to leave an objective open, are they? And Acolytes like attacking objectives because then they get to reroll wound rolls of 1 as well as hit rolls of 1. Also, when we're moving up those Acolytes, drop in a Kelermorph, which can deploy within 3 inches of your battle line units, regardless of nearby enemies. That is a model we want in the way of the enemy units. So on the enemy turn, they'll want to shoot your Acolytes and then charge the Kelermorph to get onto the objective. They won't want to charge the fight first remaining Acolytes and Locus. But now, the Locus can countercharge because of the enhancement Focus of Adoration, and they will fight first. And now you are on an objective to score at the start of your turn with your objective control 2 Acolytes. It is dependent on the enemy charging nearby, so that's why we need the Kelermorph or another small unit to block the enemy. This could also work if you as a Genestealer Cult player go first, deep strike near an objective, drop the Kelermorph in the way, the enemy charges, and the Acolytes counterattack for free to hopefully wipe out the enemy, or at least get onto the objective where their objective control 2 bodies can compete with the enemy survivors. I accept that this is an unlikely situation, but this is a very cheap enhancement. And that throwaway distraction unit doesn't need to be a Kelermorph. It could be 10 Neophytes. But before you think of them as disposable chaff, you need to know that Neophytes can also put out some impressive damage. The Genestealer Cult Neophytes may actually be the best unit that we have in our entire roster. They can fulfill any battlefield role. You want to hold primary objectives? Go to Neophytes. You want to do secondary objective actions? Go to Neophytes. You want to do damage? Actually, we have Neophytes. You want to just flood the board and be really annoying to get rid of? Oh look, Neophytes. So let's look at those 4 different roles in reverse. They're really difficult to get rid of. I'll get into more detail on why in a second, but they're also amazing because if you do get rid of them, they are very likely to come back. The way Cult Ambush works currently, a unit with the Cult Ambush ability will return on a 5+, but if they're battle line, they get +1. If they're destroyed in the first 2 battle rounds, they get another +1, and these stack. So a Neophyte unit destroyed in the first or second battle round is going to come back on a 3+ because of our special rule. So they are a unit that just keeps coming back and back. They will be missing a turn when they do that, unless you manage to get them destroyed in your own combat phase, but they always return in the enemy's reinforcement step, right at the end. So they're going to be a very effective unit for just flooding the board with troops, and we can have up to 6 of these units. So that could be 120 Neophytes if you so wished. They're very tough to remove because we have the Cult Icon. The Cult Icon means that we're basically running a unit of Necron Warriors, though without the toughness and the save and stuff. Necron Warriors get to come back in the command phase. Well, all Necron units get to regenerate in their command phase. The Cult Icon is a war gear ability that lets our unit return some models in the reinforcement step of the movement phase. It's 3 models. Alternatively, if we are on an objective and we want to have this unit on an objective to do those primary and secondary mission shenanigan things. I mean shenanigans, it's scoring victory points. The way you win the game. Then you can have D3 + 3 models back. So that can be a unit that the enemy is just putting firepower into again and again, and it's not going down. With the rise of tanks and the way that tanks and vehicles have become a lot more difficult to shift because you need really dedicated anti-tank firepower, a lot of people are bringing heavy guns, which is very ineffective at killing Neophytes. So, since the enemies are not taking a lot of anti-infantry firepower, we can just have a lot of bodies and oh, a las cannon killed one of them. Don't worry, they'll get back up. So they're a very tough unit to be on objectives. That is where you want to have them, but you can also use them as damage dealers. They have deep strike, as do the vast majority of Genestealer Cult units, so they can end up being anywhere, rules permitted. And having 20 Neophytes pop up with a large array of weapons and the Ascension Day special rule that gives sustained hits and ignores cover, that's a lot of anti-infantry firepower. That's going to be clearing most objectives. Unless for some reason the enemy has planted a tank on the objective, it could happen. But then you don't throw your Neophytes against them, usually. We do have some weapons that can help. So in a unit of 20, you will have 10 Neophytes with the hybrid firearms, which is the mix of shotguns and autoguns that we're used to. And in that squad of 20, you will have 1 with the Cult Icon and a hybrid firearm. You can have a leader who can have a leader pistol. Now, that does not replace his existing auto pistol, which all of the models have. Do remember that your Neophytes have auto pistols, so you can be firing them if you're in close combat in your own shooting phase. But your leader can fire their leader pistol and an auto pistol. You're not able to have the auto gun and special close combat weapon anymore. like the power weapon. Power pick and power maul have been combined together to just be a power weapon. Unfortunately only one attack, but you're not taking this unit for its close combat abilities. Then in that unit of 20, we can also have 4 special weapons, as we term them, as they've been in previous editions. So that's equipment like grenade launchers, flamers, and webbers. And I like all 3. All 3 are good, in any combination. The webbers are nice if you want to just do devastating wounds to literally anything. Does rely on you rolling a 6, but you do get a lot of auto hits anyway. The flamers again have torrent, so they're auto hitting at the same time, and more likely to be wounding on 4s and 5s against most targets. And grenade launchers are nice if the enemy has a lot of infantry. Then the blast keyword comes into play and you're getting D3 plus a bunch of shots. Very nice if you're on a home objective because of the range, but also the flamers and the webbers are very nice on a home objective because then you can do Overwatch. So if some Dark Eldar Scourges drop out and are going to blow away your Neophytes with their actually dedicated anti-infantry firepower, you can first fire your flamers and your web guns and murder them. Well-cooked and web-trapped Drukhari are not going to be able to fire their guns. You may have personal preference for these special weapons. Leave it in the comments how you equip your Neophytes. I say all of them are good, and that is rare in this edition. Heavy weapon, again, quite good choices all round. For every 10 medals in the squad, you can have 2 of these, and you can double up or quadruple up, because there's no limit, unlike with the Imperial Guard, on how many of the same special or heavy weapon you can take, even though our box set comes with 1 of each for every squad of 10. Ah well, let's enjoy it while we can. I do like all 3 of the guns. Heavy Stubber's getting 6 shots when you're coming out from Deep Strike, because then you're going to be at half range, and that is hitting on a 4+. It doesn't have the heavy keyword, it just always hits on a 4+, with either 3 or 6 shots. And when most of our guns in that squad are strength 3, having something strength 4 is not to be sniffed at, and at that range, it's very nice for holding a back objective and still committing anti-infantry fire. But I see that more likely people will go for the mining laser. That is probably better if you're holding a home objective, because then you're going to be staying still and then heavy kicks in, and then you're hitting on a 4+ rather than a 5+, and it is just a las cannon with half the range. So we do have las cannons of our own, they're just not as good as the las cannons you can get from Brood Brothers. And if you are coming out from Deep Strike to do damage, you're probably going to be wanting as many seismic cannons as you can fit. That is the best fit heavy weapon for them. Yes, it's a heavy weapon, so coming out from Deep Strike, you count as having moved, but you're getting 6 shots at half range. And strength 6 -1, D3 damage, you can be stripping away tank armor with that. And if you're not facing a tank, if you're facing, oh I don't know, Chaos Space Marines, something that's got multiple wounds, D3 damage is more likely to kill them in one go. So seismic cannons, really good choice for a heavy weapon. But all of them, for anything, are good. Again, you may disagree. Comment section. That's where we can give advice to fellow Genestealer Cult players who are building their Neophyte hybrids for the first time. So let's say we had 4 flamers, 4 seismic cannons, and the rest. With Ascension Day giving us sustained hits, we're looking at about 21 hits with our rapid fire hybrid autoguns, 12 seismic cannon hits, and about 14 flamer hits. And these are all ignoring cover. That is a lot of anti-infantry firepower. And we can make it even better to threaten heavy infantry and tanks. If you fire the Achilles Ridgerunner at the target first, then the crossfire rule kicks in. You remember the crossfire rule from 9th edition? Well, this is totally different and much easier to understand, thank goodness. It gives anything else shooting that target unit an extra -1 AP. So now even our hybrid firearms and our leader pistols and flamers are at -1 AP. You see how we're doing quite a lot of damage, without even resorting to the Acolytes and their demolition charges, though, you know, you probably do want to go with Acolytes and demolition charges to do a really big boom. But this is another utility of a very versatile Neophyte hybrid unit. And if it's an enemy unit that you really need to destroy, then we have the perfect ambush. So in addition to ignores cover, sustained hits, -1 AP on all guns, now we're also adding an extra ballistic skill and increasing the armor penetration by a further 1. You see now how your hybrid firearms are hitting on 3s at -2 AP. That's more likely to be doing some damage, and against something like Imperial Guard, it's just stripping away their entire save. 20 Neophytes can pretty easily kill 20 Guardsmen holding an objective. If we're going to go this route of doing a lot of damage, which characters do we want to add to the unit? Not a Clamavus. Not a Clamavus. How about a Primus? Now at this point I think we're doing enough damage to kill any infantry squad, or maybe 2 infantry squads in the game, but if you wanted, as a cult demagogue the Primus can provide full rerolls to hit. Personally I think he's better off with the Acolytes throwing many demolition charges. Because their demolition charges hit on 5+, that's where you want the rerolls. It is nice on things like the mining lasers and the seismic cannons, but I would push the Primus towards the Acolytes rather than the Neophytes. If you have multiple Primuses, we used to only be able to take 1 under the rule of Genesec. That is no longer a rule. You can take as many Primus as you like, up to the maximum 3 that any unit is limited to that isn't battle line, as per the main rules. You could go a bit more weird and have a Locus if you wanted to give the unit fight first, but you don't want to give the unit fight first because they have terrible combat ability even if they did fight first. You could have a Magus, but that's more of a defensive character, giving a 5+ feel no pain only against psychic attacks and turning off the shooting potentially of an enemy unit that's going to fire at them, but we have the ability to regenerate our models, so we're not particularly needing that. We'll just take the damage and not spend the points on a character that might stop an enemy unit from shooting. We also don't want a Biophagus because that gives lethal hits to melee weapons only, and while the Acolyte Iconward does give us a flat feel no pain of 5+, if we're going the attack mode and coming out from deep strike, we should just be relying on the number of bodies we have to keep going, or if we kill everything that's nearby, then we have the stratagem Return to the Shadows. That lets you take the unit off the board at the end of the enemy's turn and then deep strike them again in your turn. Or just let them all die and then we'll return as a blip. The best character I think to put them with, if they're going this deep strike murder route, is the Nexos. He's very useful for being able to shift blips around and correct a mistake of blips of them being too far away or too close to the enemy before they move. And if you're focusing on that ability, then having him in a small unit holding a home objective is a good idea. Rather than cult infiltration, I would focus on the ability Battlefield Analysis. Once per turn, you get a stratagem for free, even if it's already been used by another unit. Very important, that second part. So don't use a perfect ambush on your Neophyte unit with the Nexus before you've used it on your Acolyte unit that doesn't have a Nexus. You won't be able to do it the other way around. Because of the September balance patch, this ability can only be used on battle tactic stratagems. So for Genestealer Cult, that is a perfect ambush, the command point reroll, go to ground, and coordinated trap. That is at time of recording, before we have a Genestealer Cult codex with more detachments available. Coordinated trap is like the older 9th edition Crossfire, and it gives your unit +1 to wound. So that, added with perhaps a perfect ambush, and a Ridge Runner gives a lot of damage for the cultists. And as it's a battle tactic, you can use the Nexus ability to make it free, but page 1 of the September balance datasheet, only if every unit targeted by the stratagem has the same ability to modify the stratagem. So you could only make Coordinated Trap free if you had another Nexus in a second unit. So that's roughly 100 points extra for 2 units to get +1 to wound. That is still worth considering. If you want that perfect ambush, as I've mentioned, that can be made free. And because you can use it even if you've already selected a model or unit from your army as the target of that stratagem already this phase, you can have done this with the Acolytes with demolition charges and had them appear 3 inches away. Had them use a perfect ambush to get additional ballistic skill and armor penetration on their otherwise 5+ hitting demolition charges. The Nexus is really important for letting the army work. The wording on it is a little bit ambiguous, and I've seen alternate interpretations of it. Now, if you compare it to other character abilities that specify more clearly that the unit that the character is in can use a stratagem for free, we have instead here a dangling participle. Oh, Games Workshop and your dangling participles. Perhaps it needs an FAQ, but I think we're okay. It just depends how you interpret it. Is it, you can select one unit using this ability, so that would be a unit anywhere on the board, or is it, you are selecting a unit that includes a model that has this ability, and then you get the stratagem for 0 command points. Rather than it being, we're using this ability to select any unit, I think we're selecting a unit with this ability. I know the wording is different to like the Chaos Lord, but I think they're intended to be the same. So you can't just have a Nexus way back on your home objective with like 10 Neophytes sitting there flicking blips around on his table. He has to actually be in the unit that you're going to use that free stratagem on. It's a very versatile unit. Nexus is one of the best characters. The Nexus also works really well for Acolytes, which is one of the other units it can join. We'll not mention Metamorphs for now unless their points greatly change compared to the Acolytes. And if you did want a big murder ball of Neophytes or Acolytes, the Nexus can be included in the same unit with a Primus. That is a versatile killing ball. and we do love rolling them at the enemy. So that large unit of 20 Neophytes with a Nexos and or Primus, but certainly the Nexos, is what you want for killing the enemy infantry and clearing away enemy objectives. The final way to use Neophyte Hybrids is to have them in a unit of 10, maybe 20, holding the home objectives, and moving up to any midfield objectives in squads of 10 as a second wave, or just deep striking once an objective is secure. Though the Eldar Guardians may get their Fate dice, the Battle Sisters may get their Miracle dice, we have a plan generations in the making. And for each objective marker that we control with Neophyte Hybrids on it, on a 4+, you get a command point. So really, we don't even need the Nexus. We do need the Nexus for that multiple use of the same stratagem, but we've got command points to spare, and we're going to be using a lot of command points. Genestealer Cult are still a very command point hungry army. We can only generate one of these per turn, that's the cap, but having 2 command points in your own turn and 1 in the enemy turn is better than just having 1 in each. By being on a home objective, they're very tough to shift unless you're going to put a lot of firepower into them, because we can regenerate using that cult icon. If they are destroyed from long-range firepower, things like basilisks, a lot of mortar squads, or other anti-infantry, long-range indirect fire shooting, well, we can just return in the same spot as a blip. We'd miss 1 turn of generating command points and holding that objective, but the turn afterwards, we're right back where we were before. The enemy has inconvenienced us, not defeated us. And if you really didn't want that particular inconvenience of missing a turn holding the objective, because you know, victory points win games, then being one with the darkness just stops all of that anti-infantry, long-range, indirect fire from even targeting you in the first place. I suppose now you're thinking while watching on your phone or your computer, how? How do I show my appreciation for your content? Well, you can like, comment, and subscribe. That's it! Oh, it's so simple! Why didn't I think of that? How else? I also have a Ko-fi linked in the description. There's a one-off tip jar, or you can provide monthly support if you so wish. And thank you to the many people who have already done that. It means I can get the good bread extra soft. So there are several ways to use the Genestealer Cult Neophytes. Having a lot of board control and being really tough to shift come naturally to the Neophyte Hybrids, and they're everywhere as soon as you take more than a couple of units of them. At 1,000 points, 1 squad of 10 to hold the home objective and generate command points, and a squad of 20 to pop up with a Nexus and blow away enemy infantry that are on objectives or that you really don't like. Infernus Marines still can't touch them, but other units like Stern Guard, Chaos Chosen, whole platoons of Imperial Guardsmen. These are the kind of high cost at 1,000 point units that we can just be wiping away. Yes, the Guardsmen will come back because they're more sneaky and infiltratey than the Genestealer Cult are, but then we can just use Return to the Shadows and hit the same unit again. But if you are holding that home objective, I suppose you can have a Clamavus. Democracy is fundamentally flawed, as we learn once again that if you don't want an answer, don't offer it as an option. So here I am, talking about the Clamavus, the joke character in the Genestealer Cult army. Not in a cool, fun way like the Kelermorph, it's a dude from a club who decided to start coming out to the battlefield to play his disc tracks, and not the ones from like Beyond Good and Evil where it's propaganda. And it does that thing. I don't know if I can find the song. I probably can't find the song. Propaganda. That's how the song goes. You'll have to look it up. So I'm preparing for a battle. I just want to make a nice Genestealer Cult army list for my opponent that's fun to play against. And in the room next door, the Clamavus appreciators are singing about boots and cats and boots and cats. So why would you even include a Clamavus? The abilities of the Clamavus, he brings the beat down. But he has no combat ability, and so he is the one who will easily get beaten down by harsh words or some Eldar civilian that maybe doesn't even have a close combat weapon. But the Storm Guardian error has been corrected on that. So we're definitely not taking for any kind of combat ability, but for the 2 loud noises that he can make. Voice of New Truths, which means enemies within 12 inches that take Battleshock tests, subtract 1 from their Battleshock tests, and if they fail it, they take 1 mortal wound. So this is the equivalent of a dude running away from his noise. And we have the Scrambler array, which means that enemy units cannot be set up as reinforcements within 12 inches, so that refers to things like outflank and deep strike if you're facing an army with a lot of deep strike like Genestealer, like demons. Yep. There are a couple of ways I can think of making the best out of his Voice of New Truths ability. You could have him near to a Patriarch. The Patriarch makes every enemy unit within 6 inches take a battle shock test, or once per game every unit within 12 inches of him. But then you're also going to need to get the Clamavus pretty much right next to the Patriarch, and wherever the Patriarch is killing stuff, you don't want the really weak Clamavus. The other option is to use the Imperial Guard, Brood Brothers Banehammer. Its Tremor Quake cannon causes the target and every other infantry unit within 3 inches of that target take a battle shock test. But that would mean you would need to get the Clamavus really close to where the enemy you're shooting at is. Actually, maybe that is the best place for him. Yes, send him on his own straight up there. Then we'll fire a Tremor cannon at him and we'll say it's all part of the plan. This is not a lot of great utility, and it would take up pretty much all of your Brood Brothers selection just to include that in a 2,000 point list. Now, we can't have the Clamavus in a unit of Genestealers with a Patriarch. He can go with Hybrid Metamorphs. No, because you're unlikely to be taking Hybrid Metamorphs at this time, and it would mess with their scout ability to include him with them. Acolytes? Possible. You can certainly do enough damage that may trigger the enemy to take a battle shock test in their following turn, and his ability would then stop counter deep strike from a unit of, say, Inceptors, so your Acolytes that are taking out the enemy on objective could be quite safe. Or perhaps more likely, you put him with a unit of Neophytes, and he wants to be in your deployment zone. So having him with a unit of Neophytes on your home objective means that the Neophytes can be generating command points every turn, in theory, if they roll a 4+. That's their job. Neophytes on your home objective generate command points. And the Scrambler array means that enemies cannot be set up near him. So those Neophytes are quite safe from enemy deep strike and outflank, and probably won't be charged because that's more than 12 inches and you can't do anything more than a 12-inch charge. And then the only thing that can really take out those Neophytes is long-range indirect firepower, and there has to be enough of that to punch through sufficient Neophytes that they aren't going to just keep regenerating enough models that the attacks were basically worthless. I have seen a couple of Clamavi? Sure. Taken in tournament lists, either with Neophytes or just by themselves. 2 of them on the battlefield behind cover, essentially giving you, between them, a 48 inches wide area with no deep striking allowed. And when you put their auras next to each other, it's potentially 50 inches. That's alright. That is a tactic for certain. But they're going to be vulnerable to sniper fire and indirect fire if they're by themselves, and it's a toughness 3 guy with a 5+ save. So if the enemy has any tools to deal with him, he's going down quickly. Otherwise, you put him with Neophytes, and then the Neophytes can take all the hits. But then you're putting even more points into this, and you should only do it if you were going to have those Neophytes move onto the mid-board objectives anyway, because you're going to need the 2 Clamavus on the table already. Otherwise, if you don't get the first turn, you're not ready to counter the enemy turn 2 deep strike, because your turn 2 deep striking would come after theirs, and the Clamavus wouldn't be on the table for that. But if you want 2 units of Neophytes, each with a Clamavus, to walk slowly towards the midfield objectives, it could work. And I probably have been too quick to discount how good the Clamavus is when I've just been looking at the model. There is some cool artwork of him, but I just keep seeing the alternate build. It looks better, and it also looks like a Thunderbirds villain. So I'm just seeing like a knockoff of one of their characters. What are we going to have next? Some vampire-looking dude who counts index errors? With a companion called Large Avian? And maybe there can be a separate person called Mount Von Mount who loves to mount things. No, maybe not that one. Will I be buying and including a Clamavus in my army? No. Will I be converting one? Also no. It's really not my style. What I prefer to do is have the enemy deep strike, and I already have other units that can counter deep strike that unit. Just an endless chain, but we're Genestealer Cults, so we get more deep strikes, because we have more units that can deep strike. This fellow and his wiki beats will not be entering my army anytime soon. This is not liked by me for his aesthetic and irritating noise, but there is another unit that is far more neglected by the Genestealer Cult community. The Hybrid Metamorphs. I would like you to look at them again, and I will show you how they can be an asset for your cult. You may want to have alternate units to the Acolytes, or you may want to have a combat Acolyte squad that goes overground. Or you just want to put an Acolyte squad in a truck and have that move forward. So are Metamorphs now good by comparison? A Metamorph and a Biophagus can work quite well. Getting lethal hits with their high number of attacks is quite powerful if you're going to be taking out infantry. The only problem then is you lose the scout ability. And because you want to get this unit into combat, you're probably not going to rely on deploying them from deep strike because then you have a 9-inch charge to make, even if you're going to want to re-roll it with the stratagem. The Metamorph's points didn't change, they're still at 80 points for 5. But now that Pure Strain Genestealers are only 5 points less for the same number, surely Genestealers are going to be better because they can't just scout, they can infiltrate. And again, for the points that you can get for 10 Metamorphs, our 3 Sanctus models with knives just flat out better, because the Sanctus has not changed in points. So if you're buying the box set that gives you Acolytes or Metamorphs, surely it's going to be better to build them as Acolytes, even if you're going the combat route. Acolytes are better because they're battle line, so they're going to be coming back on a 3+ or 4+, depending on the battle round, instead of a 4+ or 5+. They can have demolition charges, which is what is really doing a lot of our damage at the moment, and they can have mining weapons for several high strength attacks with armor penetration. Metamorphs have the adaptability to punch through Space Marines with their damage 2 attacks, or go Horde mode and do 5 attacks against infantry but only doing damage 1, but the Acolyte claws themselves that support the mining weapons are nothing to be sniffed at. Going with the Acolytes is also more lore-friendly. As soon as it actually becomes a full-on Genestealer cult, there will be 1st and 2nd generation hybrids. But the Metamorphs are only meant to appear when the Hive Fleet gets closer and sends a signal which transforms several of the biogenetic DNA bits thingies inside people to give them weird crab claws and stuff. It's inspiring in a way that the power to get a crab claw and tentacle hand was within you all along. But even with combat, I think the Acolytes are probably better with their mining tools. Then again, the Metamorphs have the ability to scout. They can move on to the objectives earlier into the game, and if they don't look to be set up perfectly to get into a good position for turn 1, you could use the Primus ability to move them somewhere else that's more viable. But if you want scout, we also have access to Catachans. For 55 points, you can have a unit that scouts just the same distance as Metamorphs. The Metamorphs will be a cheap way to hold objectives, cheaper than Acolytes, and we have a stratagem that means they can't be shot, so they couldn't be blown off an objective. If they did lose any models, we have the banner to resurrect some, which the Catachans do not, and the Hand Flamers and 5 attacks is very nice to kill chaff. One good use for them may be to scout vehicles closer, because as soon as you put them inside a truck, then that truck can scout 6 inches as long as there's no other units in there that don't have scout. That's how scout works. Scout is important for getting onto objectives before your opponent. Even if your opponent goes first, you get to scout before the battle round begins, and in missions like Crusade, there are often primary missions you score in the first turn, and every turn. The mission cards do not allow scoring in the first turn. Those score from turn 2 onwards. And the only way to be on some of the objectives is to scout or infiltrate at the start of the game. So that is certainly another use of Metamorphs, even if they lose out to Acolytes as the popular unit to build from the box. Consider 10 Metamorphs in a truck. They help the truck get closer to the mid-board objectives, and when the Metamorphs disembark, the special rule of the truck provides reroll to wounds. The Metamorphs can all have Hand Flamers, and reroll to wounds on 10 weapons that are already auto-hitting, even at strength 3, will make the enemy fear torrent weapons, the way we fear them after we arrive from reserve and Overwatch happens. As a disadvantage to this tactic, if you have space for Brood Brothers, Catachans in a Taurus is much cheaper and gives you the same number of bodies, less hitting power, and only 2 Flamers. But if you just want to get to the middle of the board, Catachan plus Taurus is your budget version. The drawback is lack of stratagem synergy, as well as not fighting on death or returning models with a banner. Maybe a banner like this. The hand is a not so subtle thumbs up as a reminder that if you have come this far in the video, it is a good time to click like. Remember that at time of recording, Metamorphs cost less than Acolytes. While Acolytes are not being taken for their combat mining weapons right now, that is the thinking of the Ascension Day detachment, which gives bonuses to shooting, like the demo charges. When the codex arrives, there should be more combat-focused detachments that have more stratagems for combat. You may want to practice with your Metamorphs in preparation for the codex. I really want Metamorphs to work. but I think they will lose out to their bigger, tougher, still very hitty cousins, the Aberrants. The Genestealer Cults are fragile, and have to make up for that with sabotage and explosions. Not all the time. Said not all the time. Behave. In 10th edition of Warhammer 40,000, the Genestealer Cult have one of the toughest combinations in the game that is potentially unkillable. Though for rules purposes, I must stress that if you did kill them, then they would count as dead for victory points, etc. But why I made that caveat, we'll get into. What ingredients do we need? Pretty simple ones. 5 Aberrants and an Abominant. Let's have a look at the stats. A 6-inch move is average, but 3 wounds is what a lot of characters are having at the moment. Leadership 7 is fine, objective control 1. We're not bothered about that. We're not here to hold objectives, we're here to be an unkillable mass that's either going to wipe the enemy off the objective so there's no competition, so objective control 1 doesn't matter, it's perfect. Or we can just be a permanent, never-dying hindrance that keeps hitting the enemy with massive hammers. Aberrants are toughness 6, so lasguns will only wound them on a 6. Well, you say, I have a las cannon at strength 12. Okay. I have the hulking bodyguard ability, so as long as there's a character, like the Abominant, in the unit, if the strength of the attack is greater than the toughness characteristics of the Aberrants, then you subtract 1 to the wound roll. So you think you're wounding on 2s, actually you're wounding on 3s. Alright, let's say that you did still roll a 3+, it's above average, yep. Las cannons do d6 plus 1 damage, again, assuming you rolled average, 3 plus 1, 4 wounds. Ignores the save of 5+. Alright. Well, now we have feel no pain, 4+. So an average roll on that means 2 wounds of those 4 are getting through. That doesn't even kill 1 Aberrant. How many more las cannons have you got? So we're very much no longer talking the 7th edition Aberrants of having 2 wounds at toughness 4 and a 5 up feel no pain. We have adapted since then. We kept the 5+ save though. Nostalgia if nothing else. The Star Children will rise. And even if they fall, we get back up. You cannot keep us down. If you get through the Abominant's 5 wounds and 4+ feel no pain with some kind of sniper precision shot, or you have an amazing combat character that does an epic duel and strikes the Abominant, well, the first time the Abominant is killed, just like Celestine, as the Abominant is our saint, on a 2+, you set the model back up on the battlefield as close as possible to where it was destroyed. And, not within engagement range of the enemy, but with full wounds remaining. So even if you do murder your way through all of the Aberrants, then kill the Abominant, you're gonna have to kill her 1 more time. And she's got the same kind of stats as the Aberrants, toughness 6, 4+ feel no pain, but 5 wounds. And with her power sledgehammer, she hits with the power of a las cannon right back at you, but with 3 attacks. You don't need a Patriarch's Claw's worth of power when you have this. Actually, the Abominant can be the Warlord, if you like. A leader is a leader, doesn't matter about elites or HQ anymore, and these are a damage dealing unit as well as a very tough unit. Besides the Abominant, the Aberrants, with 3 attacks each with heavy power weapons, including the sustained hits from the Abominant, you're looking at 12 hits. At strength 8, you're going to be wounding on 2s, maybe 3s, at a very strong, for this edition, AP-2, doing 3 damage. The Terminator squashing amount of damage. And if you were against a really tough enemy like a vehicle that was something like toughness 9, then you have coordinated trap. So each time a model in either one of your units, because you can do this on 2 units, you can surround and destroy an enemy, and that gives you +1 to wound on the attacks. So enemy vehicles will not stand up to you. If you want to make the unit even tougher to kill, become one with the darkness. Then the unit can only be targeted when the enemy is within 12 inches of them. And even if they are, they have stealth. so the enemies are at -1 to hit them. So you think, okay, it's a really tough unit, it hits really hard, I'll just ignore it and avoid it. 6 inches is quite slow. Well, that is where we return to the shadows. At the end of the opponent's turn, one Genestealer Cult infantry unit can be removed from the battlefield and placed into strategic reserves, able to come back on in my next turn. If you want even more shenanigans, and the Genestealer Cult do indeed like some shenanigans, how about the Abominant has inscrutable cunning? Despite the face, having 2 brains makes you very smart. And while the leader is in the unit, they can infiltrate, so you can start really close to the enemy. And if you're going to go first, move up and hit something before they ever have a chance to shoot any part of the unit. Overwatch accepted. And if you were thinking, oh, hang on, some of those stratagems you were mentioning, they cost 2 command points. Well, with the inscrutable cunning, on a 4+, you can get back that command point you spent. And if you think the enemy is going to send lots of powerful close combat units at you, Prowling Adjutant for the Abominant. If the enemy ends their move within 9 inches of you, as if they're going to make a charge move, then you can move up to D6. Eldar can eat your heart out. We are the ones who battle focus now. Move D6 inches away from them, they fail their charge, we move 6 inches closer in our turn and get the charge, and you fight first when you charge. So those hammers will come a-swinging. So it's a lot of damage and a lot of toughness to get through. And for some malformed civilians with hammers, they do pretty well. One other option is to have a Biophagus, and with his little attendant creature, he can make it so that the Aberrants are wounding infantry on a 2+, but the Aberrants with their strength 8 are already wounding the majority of infantry on a 2+. I don't think they need that help. Much better to have the Abominant. Oh yeah, and you thought the Abominant was the only one that comes back. Ha 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 ha! No. If the Aberrants die, whether or not the Abominant dies separately, the squad can now come back on a 4+. They appear as a token, an ambush marker 9 inches from the enemy, and unless you run over to them and start burning holes in the ground, they're going to pop up and return again. They do come back without the Abominant, but otherwise, this whole show continues on. The hammer train never ends. I have been, and continue to be, Christian von Carmian. That was taken from one of my first videos about the Genestealer Cults, and it does hold up. I like the energy of this Christian von Carmian fellow. I should probably throw some tip money in his Ko-Fi digital tip jar. Really easy to do, and greatly appreciated. I said I liked his energy. I didn't say he was subtle. I want to conclude the advice for the Biophagus. We have heard that he can join Acolytes, Neophytes, Aberrants, or Metamorphs. Where should he go? Well, it isn't Neophytes because they're not designed for combat. The issue is the detachment we have, the Ascension Day detachment. With a combat-focused detachment in Twisted Helix style, then he will probably shine far more than right now. Lethal hits on Metamorphs is good for the many attacks, and being able to switch on Anti-Infantry 2+ can be setting the unit to high-speed blend, but Metamorphs lose out to Acolytes on most metrics. Those Acolytes will want to shoot more than use mining tools and employ close combat weapons, as the Ascension Day detachment only gives us one combat stratagem. With Inscrutable Cunning, the Biophagus and Acolytes could infiltrate, throw some demo charges and then charge, but they're very fragile. The unit that is not fragile is Aberrants. Against units with toughness 5 like Terminators or Orc Infantry outside of Gretchen, the Alchemicus Familiar is lovely for that once per game wounding on a 2+. It is considered to be the best Familiar. However, for a few points more, the Abominant provides raw damage in the form of a big hammer and more attacks from sustained hits to get through infantry or tanks with weight of attacks. Very heavy attacks. When, or if, the enemy gets through the Aberrants, the Abominant getting back up will delay the enemy for another turn, or she's able to smash more units than expected. All the while, our other units are scoring victory points. So there are 3 viable units for the Biophagus. He can be used, I just prefer not to use him in the Ascension Day detachment. As the rules change and we get more detachments, that's where he will become more viable. The Acolyte Iconward is in similar limbo. There are often better choices of characters. Other support characters can double up with the Iconward, but not the Primus or the Magus. And most units will want a Primus over an Iconward. When we can return by cult ambush in any detachment, having an Iconward is throwing points into rolling a dice to stay alive, to feel no pain, when we already have an ability to roll a dice to come back at full health. And a destroyed unit of Acolytes will come back with demo charges. Neophytes, Acolytes and Metamorphs already have banners that let them regenerate models. Those are the only units that he can join, so a 5+ feel no pain is usually not worth the points for Genestealer Cult units. The Iconward's good ability is to protect blips. However, once you've learnt where to place your ambush markers, and I now have 2 videos with advice on that, linked in the description and the comment section, the Iconward is not helping a lot. The Iconward can help you learn, but maybe falling off the bike is better for learning than keeping your training wheels on. It's been a while since I rode a bike. I don't know if that metaphor holds up. So the Biophagus and Iconward have some use, but we have less usefulness for the next character with the rules provided in the Genestealer Cult Index. But we will find a way to make them useful. The Magus isn't great as a leader. They might actually be the worst leader we can have in the Genestealer Cult roster. Now in 9th edition, the Magus was great because we had psychic powers. You could choose 2 different psychic powers and cast them in your turn, so we could have an extra attack on a unit, or they could advance and charge. The Magus was an amazing force multiplier. But now, we don't have a psychic phase because it's 10th edition, and we just have the 1 psychic power, which is very short range. Now the profile of the Magus is very generic, human-shaped person that you get across a lot of different factions. 6-inch move, toughness 3, 5+ save, 4 wounds. Yeah, it's a person. So there's nothing special there. For the weapons, we have an auto pistol. Ooh, maybe we'll fire it at some point. But no psychic attack. There is no smite. There is no cleanse, no scourge, no nothing there. And then for melee, we have 3 attacks with a stick. It's a strength 5 stick that does D3 damage, but it's still just a stick. For an average of like 1 wound, or 2 wounds if you're lucky, or facing something very weak. But then something with a very weak armor save is probably not going to have more than 1 wound anyway. So you might do 1 wound. This means that the Magus is not fulfilling any kind of combat character role. In 9th edition we had a bio dagger that did a mortal wound on a 3+, just 1 attack, but it's an extra wound. In 8th edition there was the dagger of swift sacrifice, which was a great weapon to do armor penetration and extra damage. And it was like, surprise, my Magus is actually good in combat. Bet you weren't expecting that. And in 9th edition, the Cult of the Bladed Cog could have a mechanical force field that did mortal wounds whenever someone charged you. And at the start of every combat phase, it would do more mortal wounds before any combat had taken place. Now there is no Magus combat build. At least not until we get more detachments, which is whenever the codex comes out. And then we have to hope that there's some enhancement there that's like, oh, here's an actually good combat weapon. And even then, you'll probably want to put it on the Primus, because the Primus is our combat character and can go well with Acolyte Hybrids, complements the Acolyte Hybrids, gives them rerolls, and the weapons that he has fits the combat style of the Acolytes, assuming you're not just going pure demolition charges and then ignoring any weapon after that. And because we have no combat options, we also don't want to join Hybrid Metamorphs. The other reason we don't want to join Hybrid Metamorphs is because then we lose the Scout ability. The Magus doesn't have Scout, so putting them in a unit of Metamorphs with Scout, they lose Scout. Because every model in the unit needs to have Scout in order to scout. That, and people tend to take Acolyte Hybrids over Metamorphs anyway. So our options for putting them in a unit, you put the Magus in a unit of Neophytes. And then the unit of Neophytes will get a 5+ feel no pain, but only against psychic attacks. We're not getting a lot of bonus utility out of that here. No rerolls to hit, no fights first, which you wouldn't really want on Neophytes anyway, and no lethal hits to make combat do something for them. But again, you wouldn't want that on Neophytes. So the Magus is one of the few characters that goes with Neophytes, but only because the other options are not great for the Magus. Not that the Neophytes are getting anything particular out of it. The Magus really needed a points reduction, considering they're not doing a lot, but they didn't receive a points reduction. Maybe we should just be thankful that the Magus did not go up in points. Here's one of the good ways I can think of to use the Magus. That person there is Christian von Carmian. Every day he gets comments like, take off the VR headset, go outside, touch grass. But aside from the dangers of the sun, outside also has a lot of attractive women who want to become his wife. For just £2 a month, you can keep him inside, safe, and talking about Warhammer. Please do your bit to support the channel and watch more videos. And that's it. There we go. No, wait, that was the secret to eternal life. Let me try again. Alternatives to the Magus first. For exactly the same points, we can have an Iconward, and that gives a flat. 5+ feel no pain. Not only against psychic things, always feel no pain. If you're wanting a leader for the cult, there is the Patriarch. They give a mini Shadow in the Warp and have combat ability, but then you will need to have some pure strain Genestealers for the Patriarch to go with. Even if we're thinking of things to go with the Neophytes, the Primus is better because that gives you full rerolls to hit, which is very useful when you have mining lasers and seismic cannons that are hitting on a 5+, or just find a better use for the Magus model. Now the Brood Brothers have a Primaris Psyker, and they give a better feel no pain against psychic attacks, 4+ rather than 5+. And you can have a 4+ invulnerable save against shooting attacks coming at you, and more than that, you get a ranged psychic attack, which the Magus just does not. The drawback is that then you can only join Brood Brothers units with the Primaris Psyker, not Neophytes. Kazakin are a good unit and thematically make a very nice bodyguard of elite Brood Brothers or Neophytes protecting their cult leadership. Then you could have the Primaris Psyker using this Magus model. Kazakin can also give themselves an order each turn, even though they're not part of the Imperial Guard army. Though we don't get access to Voice of Command as a rule, we can still use the orders because the Kazakin have a special rule that gives them an order. Regardless of having Voice of Command, which they don't, which we don't as Genestealer Cult, so we do get the order for Kazakin. When the Primaris Psyker is using his Psychic Barrier, if he messes up and rolls a 1, that's D3 mortal wounds to the unit. If the Magus messes up and rolls a 1, that's D3 mortal wounds to the model. So you're much more likely to have the Magus die from their own psychic shenanigans than you are with the Primaris Psyker. The mind control of the Magus is only 12 inches away. That's a very short range. And then you pick one enemy unit within that range, roll a dice. On a 1, you take some mortal wounds on the model. 2 to 5, that enemy unit is at -1 to hit. And if you're lucky enough to roll a 6, it doesn't shoot at all. And once per battle, you can make this 24-inch range. The Primaris Psyker gives you a 4+ invulnerable save against everything attacking your unit. So the Magus is limited to 24-inch range. The Primaris Psyker is everything. The Magus needs line of sight. The Primaris Psyker's ability works against everything that's attacking your squad. So it will also work against indirect fire, whereas the Magus needs line of sight. The Primaris Psyker stops all incoming fire, whereas the Magus can only, at best, stop one enemy.
Well, that must have saved the life of whoever was wearing it.
Well, it sure would have if it hadn't been for all them other bullets flying in from everywhere.
So how do we use the Magus? Well, you could come from underground with a group of Neophytes as a bodyguard, or forget the bodyguard, just have the Magus by themselves, and mind control one unit that you really don't want to have shooting. So that could be a Basilisk or something that's firing indirectly, a Desolation Squad. You pop up near them because the Magus has Deep Strike, roll a dice, as long as you don't roll a 1, that unit is going to be at least -1 to hit. And I'm picking these examples because they have special rules that let them ignore the -1 to hit for firing indirectly anyway. This may be the best use. Popping up alone and annoying an enemy unit that you don't want to have firing a lot of bullets. A Tau Crisis team that has a lot of shots. They want to be -1 to hit. But what you can't do is resist Overwatch. So you can't have them pop up and then not get shot, whether with a unit of Acolytes with demolition charges or Neophytes, because you can only use the mind control power in your opponent's shooting phase, not in your own movement phase. So we're still vulnerable to Deep Strike followed by Overwatch. But I have a way that we can make that 50 points really work. Now in 8th edition, we had a psychic power called Mind Control. Sure, that exists here, but it's nowhere near as good. In 8th edition, you could pick an enemy unit, and as long as you passed a test against them, you got to fire all of their guns as if it was your model. Alternatively, you could make one close combat attack. But you could fire an enemy's flamer on the models in its own squad. Or you could use a knight and have it shoot at another enemy knight. So with this power, we just need to think once again about scale. Sure, one infantry squad getting -1 to hit for a phase might be a little annoying, but using it on a Baneblade, or a Space Marine Gladiator with lots of guns and lots of shots, That -1 to hit will do more, and maybe you'll roll a 6, and then you just turn off that massive knight as it points its flame cannon at your Neophyte squad. That's what you've got to use the Magus for. You're not protecting the one squad that you're in, like the Primaris Psyker is. You are targeting one enemy to be worse at shooting. And it's done at the start of the shooting phase, not when that enemy unit declares it's going to shoot at you or something else. So you can chase around the enemy's biggest thing, keep rolling the dice, keep giving them -1 to hit, or turning off their shooting altogether, or just blowing yourself up. But we'll see how the dice roll. And that can be how you make a use of the Magus. So we just looked at using the Magus alone. So now seems a good time to look at the Genestealer Cult characters that are meant to operate alone, starting with the Sanctus. Hey, look at me, I'm like way up here like a sneaky Genestealer Cult sniper. Bet you weren't expecting that. That's what we're talking about today, snipers. And the Genestealer Cult have 2 snipers. The blood is just going to my head. Hang on. Yeah, I'm okay. So as a Genestealer Cult player, we have 2 snipers to pick from, one on a bike and one on foot. The Sanctus is the one on foot. The Sanctus has Infiltrate and Lone Operative, so that means you can deploy him pretty much anywhere on the table. So if you deploy him really high up on a building or a tower, and if you're 12 inches away from the ground or the enemy, then you're basically immune to bullets, because you have Lone Operative and enemies can't shoot you if they're more than 12 inches away. It's unlikely that the buildings would be that high, but you could. But also, being on the high ground gives you another bonus, an extra -1 AP from plunging fire, a rule that so many people are forgetting, because there are now basically just 2 rules for cover. Either you get cover, or you don't, also plunging fire if you're up really high. Their profile is pretty meh in itself. They are a dude, but with a 5+ invulnerable save just to keep things going, and stealth, so that if enemies are within 12 inches to shoot you, then they're at -1 to hit, because you're stealthy, because of the fancy cloak. Fancy cloaks give you stealth. That's the rule now. And there's 2 ways to kit out the Sanctus, either as a combat person with a Sanctus Bio Dagger, which is anti-infantry 3+ and precision, a very general way of killing enemies, but you need to get real close. Or you can have a Cult Sniper Rifle and generic close combat weapon. The Cult Sniper Rifle has Anti-Psyker 2+, heavy and precision, so if you don't move, you're hitting on a 2+, and precision means that you can shoot characters even if they're in an attached unit. And we have a bonus for this. At the start of the battle round, select one enemy unit. That doesn't need to be a character, just a unit. And each time you attack them, you can ignore cover and you have Devastating Wounds. Devastating Wounds is very effective, and it's one of the things that people are complaining about in this edition, so let's exploit it now while we can. It means that if you are shooting at a psychic character, or psychic unit, or a psychic character that is in a unit, which means they get the psychic keyword, on a 2+, you'll be doing 3 mortal wounds with your Cult Sniper Rifle. So, in theory, you don't actually need to even shoot the psychic character that's in a unit. So if there is this brand new Space Marine Librarian in Terminator armor, with a unit of brand new Space Marine Terminators, well, you're not going to be able to kill a Librarian in one shot, but you will be able to kill a Terminator in one shot. And it doesn't matter about the invulnerable save, you wound them on a 2+, because there is a cycle in the unit, and that means the unit has the psychic keyword, and as long as they're the unit that you have chosen to be your prey, you're going to do 3 mortal wounds and instantly kill a Terminator. That's pretty much getting you your points back right there, because the Sanctus is 50 points. And he is very good at killing characters. You can destroy Ahriman in 2 turns. Now let's compare that to the Vindicare Assassin, who costs 80 points. As the Sanctus is 50, that means you could get 3 Sanctus for 2 Vindicare Assassins, basically. Oh, but wait, you can't! Because the Vindicare Assassin is an epic hero, so you can only have 1 of them. The Sanctus isn't, and we are no longer Gene-Sect locked. So we can have 3 of these. So we can have 3 very effective snipers dotted around the battlefield, taking out units. They don't all need to pick the same model to be the prey for the Psychic Spore. You don't need to pick a unit that's on the battlefield. You don't need to be on the battlefield yourself to use this ability. But if you're going the sniper route, I would be on the battlefield, ready to shoot people. It does mean you can't really have an epic sniper duel between the Sanctus and the Vindicare Assassin, like it's enemy at the gates or something like that, because the rule still persists that you need to be within 12 inches of them to shoot. So you're going to get real close with your sniper rifles before you can start having a sniper duel. And I think the Sanctus is better than the Vindicare Assassin. Yes, the Vindicare Assassin's profile is better. Doesn't particularly matter because we have lone operatives, so we're unlikely to be getting shot. One unit is going to massively suffer because of the Sanctus Psychic Spoor. We're going to be wounding them relatively easily, especially if they're a psychic unit. Or if we're doing combat, which I'll get to, an infantry unit. Devastating wounds on a 3+, that's pretty good. Whereas the Vindicare Assassin has no anti-special rules, just devastating wounds. And they are a very good unit and very popular for a lot of different Imperial armies like Imperial Knights and Imperial Guard and Battle Sisters, because Battle Sisters have nothing like this that can do sniper work. The Vindicare Assassin's Deadshot ability means that if they roll a critical hit, so that's a 6 to hit, you're not going to be able to modify that, you actually need to roll a 6, then you get to add 3 to the damage. Ooh, okay, but you still need to wound, and the enemy's still going to get their invulnerable saves unless you then also roll a 6 to wound. And if they have a decent armor save, they're still going to get their armor save. And yes, there is also a shield break around for once per game, however, you don't know when you're going to roll a 6. You just gotta hope that the time that you do well is the turn that you've used the shield break around. Now we're hitting on 2s as a Vindicare Assassin. You're wounding on probably 3s, assuming you're hitting a toughness 4 model, which most models in the game are, because of the sheer number of Space Marines. And then just don't mess up the damage roll. Compare that to a Sanctus who can be going for their target. We're much more reliably doing mortal wounds, assuming you're either shooting at a psychic unit or stabbing your knife into infantry. And there's a lot of infantry in the game. That is most of the units in the game. So we don't need a Vindicare Assassin. We have Vindicare Assassins at home. For the Sanctus, a possible enhancement to use is Prowling Adjutant. So if the enemy does get close enough that they're within 12 inches of you, you can move d6 inches away from them. Stay out of 12 inches, you can't be shot. You can't be charged. You are safe, and then you can do horrible things to the enemy in their turn. Our other sniper, the Jackal Alphus, has that anyway, but they get to move a set 6 inches rather than d6. The Jackal Alphus, though, is not a lone operative. What's the matter, Jackal Alphus? Did you forget how to sniper? Did you not realize that maybe you should turn off your bike engine so it's not revving all the time while you aim at the enemy? Okay, but that is one other way to use them. A better way to use the Jackal Alphus is to put them in a unit of Jackals on the bikes, but we'll look at that a bit later. There are other snipers to compare to the Sanctus. What about Mr. Nightspear, who is another sniper, but is an epic hero, so you can only have one of them. And while they have a bonus that lets a unit of rangers that they've joined basically become lone operatives, that is the only way that Illic Nightspear, I said it, Illic Nightspear is getting lone operative. They don't have it by themselves. And they don't have any kind of target precision special abilities to make their devastating wounds better. You just have to roll a 6. We know that Eldar have shenanigans to automatically do roll a 6, like having a Farseer next to them and just strands of fate dice. But that's using a 6 to do 3 mortal wounds. Sanctus here on a 2+ against the right target. Caveat. We do 3 mortal wounds. Or we can just go straight in for combat. Because we're not Genesect, we can have 3 Sanctus Assassins. And that costs less than 10 Metamorphs. They're more survivable to shooting, and they hit really hard in close combat. 18 attacks, hitting on 2s, wounding infantry on 3s, and if we've decided that that unit is the one that we want to have die today, then we're going to get devastating wounds against them and be throwing out a lot of mortal wounds. The AP is -2 compared to the Metamorphs -1, so we're much more likely to get through their armor if we're not doing devastating wounds against them. And also, a 5+ invulnerable save makes us more survivable than the Metamorphs. I think it's best to have them as the sniper mode. It does limit them to be anti-psyker, but we can pair them up, have 2 of them, and really make a mess of one character. And once the enemy units don't have characters, since this edition is all about putting characters in units, you massively reduce the effectiveness of that unit if they haven't got a character. But Combat Sanctus, also a very good option. You could deep strike, but then you're relying on passing a 9-inch charge. Or you could just hide out of line of sight, wait for the enemy to get close, They can't shoot you for more than 12 inches away. And then you move, advance, and charge. Because of Creeping Shadow, we can advance and charge in the same turn, or fall back and charge in the same turn. So if you got tied up with a unit that's not your Psychic Spur target, fall back, charge off into that unit. A very effective, points-efficient murder ball. Not even a ball. Murder stick? Murder dude. It's a murder dude. And so the Sanctus is definitely a much better assassin, except for the Orcs, which have a medical boy who is an even better assassin than that. Look at how stupid this is! You hit them in combat. Earthy syringe, precision attacks, extra attacks so you can do it as well as your power claw. You're hitting on a 3+, you're wounding infantry on a 4+, and then, as long as you roll that 4+, D6 extra mortal wounds. So you're just running up to any old character and going, stab, there we go, I'm an assassin now. Like the doctor dude from the Assassin's Creed games. It's that, and it's not fair. And of course everyone's suspicious of the dude floating around with night vision goggles in a cloak, but no one suspects the orc that decided to take up medicine. Pain boy, best assassin. Okay, it doesn't matter about the orcs. There was, in 9th edition, one more assassin that the Genestealer Cult had that you may be wanting to know more about. The Kelermorph. But the role of the Kelermorph has changed, and they no longer fit the assassin archetype, as you will see. The Kelermorph is a lone operative. No, a lone gunman. I get all my knowledge about the United States from cowboy films, so if the cities are not just dusty desert settlements easily harassed by 5 men who own horses, please don't break my vision if that's not the case. I'm not quite sure about the tone of this model. Every time I look at it, I see a cowboy hat. Maybe that's just the Mandela effect, but this 2nd generation hero sort of works in the tone of the Genestealer Cult, but a bit more on the silly side. Not stupidly silly, like bringing a propaganda DJ to battle to inspire the troops with unts, and its twin brother, unts. Yes, he is a beacon against oppression, a lone figure vigilantly fighting against imperial cruelty. But the tone of the Genestealer Cults generally are not cowboys and bandits, or Indians as they're termed in these movies, and the United States military. It is an oppressed mining group that falls somewhere between the 1890s and 1980s Britain. If he was more representative of the faction, then he would be a trade union leader. But I can see why the large company of Games Workshop didn't want to make a TU committee member a hero in their setting. If you think the reason would be because it's boring or strange to see on a tabletop, I point you again to the techno equivalent of a drummer boy and the old man staring at the table planning to take down Games Workshop from the outside. But cowboys are fun in the films! And as long as Games Workshop doesn't make it ultra-modern and have a vigilante fighting against an oppressive police force who shoot people for the slightest reason, like the armed officer felt unsafe in the civilian's presence. Because otherwise it would just be Necromunda, another Games Workshop IP set in the 41st millennium. The Kelermorph is all about friendship and inspiration, when other factions are about chastisement and punishment for failure. That makes him fun, and understandably one of the more popular Genestealer Cult units. Thankfully, Games Workshop didn't make him an epic hero, so he can take more than one, and there isn't just one dude teleporting around the galaxy. It is genetic to the 2nd generation, like being a Primus. You see, the ability was inside you all along, because of a strand of Genestealer DNA implanted into your unwilling grandparent. The Kelermorph's stats are very average. Absurdly average. Movement 6, 5+ save, 3 wounds. Yeah, this is a dude. The Kelermorph is toughness 3, like the Primus, despite being a 2nd generation, and in 9th and 10th edition, the Acolyte Hybrids that are 2nd generation went up to toughness 4, so the Kelermorph has stats more like a Neophyte. This will be useful for a point later. But he doesn't have just one big iron on his hip, he has 3. And his guns go... yeah, they're not very good. His auto stubs have no armor penetration, and are now damage 1, compared to previous editions when they're damage 2. It's very weak. Yet he's not very good at shooting, the one thing he does, especially compared to what you may have been used to from 8th and 9th edition. The Liberator auto stubs have 6 shots, and he gets sustained hits D3. Now, in the current and presumed to be very long-running Genestealer Cult detachment, when you come from reserve, you get sustained hits 1 anyway. Yes, D3 is better and they don't stack. It is either D3 or 1. You're able to choose which version you get. Obviously, you pick the D3 that's on the guns. And he has precision to be able to shoot at characters, but strength 5 means you'll be wounding most characters on a 3. So you're looking at 4 wounds against a character. There are devastating wounds, but that relies on rolling a 6, which you'll maybe do with one of the wounds. So you will score on average 1 or 2 wounds against a character or any other infantry. So he can't do what he's done previously and pop up and blow away a character that's been left slightly exposed. He can't just turn up and destroy a unit of like 5 Celestians. Not just because Celestians don't exist anymore, but because he has no armor penetration to get through their saves. If he's going to attack a unit of Stern Guard, he might kill 1. Cometh the Hour, Cometh the Hero allows him to be set up within 3 inches of a Genestealer Cult Acolyte or Neophyte squad and 3 inches away from the enemy, but there's no particular benefit for doing so. Yes, he has lone operative, but you want to put him near a unit because of his gunslinger ability. The Kelermorph's gunslinger ability is kind of fun. When an enemy shoots a Genestealer Cult battle line unit, so that Acolyte or Neophyte unit that you are near to, after that enemy unit is shot, the Kelermorph can shoot back and avenge them. The problem is, with his pistols being 12 inches, you're going to need to get him so close to the enemy that his lone operative doesn't give him any protection. Because with lone operative, you can't be shot if you're more than 12 inches away from the enemy. Well, he needs to be within 12 inches just to fire his guns. And having 3 wounds at a 5+ armor save, even a 5+ invulnerable save, it's very weak and he'll die quite quickly. There are a lot of other units across several armies that can do a very similar thing and shoot back. We've mentioned previously the World Eater's Hellbrute. Okay, so say you're here, you get shot by a las pistol, then you go, oh, I'm gonna get you. Yeah, you don't actually need to shoot back at the unit that shot you. So then you get hit by a missile, and you go, oh, that's made me really angry. I'm a World Eater's Hellbrute. Oh, I'm gonna get... Yeah. Cypher does a similar thing, but at twice the points cost nearly. The Invader ATV does a similar thing, and is better. The Attack Bike is exactly the same points as the Kelermorph at 55 points, but the Attack Bike is better. And the Necron Destroyer, the Hexmark Destroyer with the 6 pistols, very much going for the I'm a cowboy Necron, yeehaw, reanimation. I can't think of a good catchphrase for it. This rebel gunslinger called Mark is 70 points and his guns are so much better. Same 6 shots, still hitting on Ballistic Skill 2+, but at Strength 6 and AP -2, that is a massive improvement over the Liberator auto stubs, meaning that you might actually be able to kill something, and because they're 18-inch range, then you're actually able to benefit from lone operative and shoot without being shot back. So what can we do with the Kelermorph? Because we're obviously going to use him because he's very cool. He pairs very nicely with Neophytes, because you're going to have a squad of 10 or 20 of them, a larger squad that can survive and take some hits compared to the smaller 5 or 10 model Acolyte squads. But the Kelermorph doesn't have a great role as an assassin anymore. He might be able to take out a couple of mortar teams that are on an objective, but again, he's unlikely to do 6 wounds to wipe out all 3 teams. So there'll still be a team left firing mortars, holding an objective, assuming that the team passes their battle shock test in the coming turn. So if he's not great at pop up and kill anymore, what do we use him for? What's going to be his role on the battlefield? Well, he could be quite good at home defense. There he is, protecting the homestead. He's not amazing at Overwatch, and since he can't be in a unit of Neophytes, you can't just have the whole group fire Overwatch together, so he has to stay still, let the Neophytes get shot by whatever it is that's just come out of reserve, and then he can fire back at them and perhaps knock a couple of wounds off. It may be an idea just to have him entirely by himself. As he's got lone operative, he could sit on a back objective, not get hit by any indirect fire, because lone operative prevents that, and he's cheaper than a 10-man Neophyte unit or even 5-man Acolyte squad, so he could be a cheap base holding model, even if the objective that's in your deployment zone, assuming there is one, is right out in the open. No one can shoot him, unless they're able to deep strike themselves. So being a cheap model that can hold an objective in the back is probably what I'm going to end up using him for, rather than being someone that pops up, attacks a character, fails, and then dies in a gunfight blaze of glory. There again, if he was near a Neophyte squad, and he was about to take a lot of shots that the Neophytes normally wouldn't be able to cover for, because he's not part of an attached unit, you can use Unquestioning Loyalty for 1 command point, and for your opponent's shooting phase or fight phase, you can pass all of the wounds onto that Neophyte squad instead. Another potential command point you could use on him is Perfect Ambush. Now, he's not going to be able to much improve his ballistic skill beyond the 2+ it already is, unless there's an enemy that gives you -1 to hit, and that will let you improve the armor penetration of his auto stubs from 0 to -1, but that's still not doing a great amount of damage, and that stratagem is much better spent on Acolytes or Neophytes that are coming from reserve in the same turn. So I think we've kind of established that he's a fun character, but not a competitive character. With fun in mind, do you want to buy one? And maybe you want some other Genestealer Cult models too. I really want to buy one though. But at £19, 24 euros, 33.50 American dollars, or 38 Canadian dollars, he's kind of expensive. So what do? Oh, well, then we'll just wait for entropy and the slow decay of the universe to claim us all. Or we buy 10 Neophytes and convert them. Oh, that's much better. Let's do that one. So while you're converting one Neophyte to have all of the pistols, you can get a Biophagus from cutting the banner and using the spiky bits that were at the side, put them on the top, and use this head with the mask. There's your Biophagus. With an extra barrel on one of the auto guns, you can pretty easily get a Sanctus sniper. You've got a model with a demolition charge arm. There's your Reductus. And the 2 larger models that are meant to be equipped with heavy weapons like mining lasers, they could easily become a Primus and a Locus. That Genestealer Cult symbol you cut off the top of the banner so that you could easily make a Biophagus, put that on the Locus. There you go, it looks just like this model, or pretty similar. And that'll save you, saving is a technical term, quite a bit of money. So I expect many of you will still be playing with him in casual games. If we're thinking along those lines, Prowling Adjutant may be a useful enhancement. For an extra 15 points, that means that when an enemy moves within 9 inches of him, he can move D6, hopefully to get out of that 12-inch range so his lone operative kicks in and he cannot be targeted. That way, he could survive potentially on an objective for a bit longer before he then gets 1 round of shooting and then dies in a blaze of glory. But I know you don't want to be told that the model you have is bad. You want to be told how you can use that model in a good or clever way. So if he isn't popping up and yee-hawing all over the enemy commander, what can he do? Because of cometh the hour, cometh the hero, he can be a second person to complete secondary objectives. Behind enemy lines is a secondary objective that you get more points for if you have 2 units in the enemy deployment zone. 10 Neophytes go up first, they survive the overwatch, then the Kelermorph comes in afterwards. There's your 2 units. When he's there, he can deploy a teleport homer in the following turn. You could then use him to return to the shadows, and when you need to perform an action somewhere else, like near a group of acolytes that want to be charging away from an objective and getting into combat, he's able to pop up near to them, he can complete the action in the shooting phase while the acolytes are off charging or throwing demolition charges. He's the one that does the work so that the acolytes and neophytes can do the fighting. And that, rather than using any of his pistols, is how you can win the day with the Kelermorph. For 10 points more, there is another lone operative we can use to complete secondary objectives, and we do so with much more impactful abilities and a disregard for the integrity of property. We must now swap our cowboy hats for berets. You can keep the Reductus back on those home objectives, and then perform actions in a, say, fast or vehicle-heavy list, so she can complete actions pretty safely, although you'll probably want something like the little Cyclops demolition tank to come on from outflank and complete the secondary objective to have units in all 4 quarters. The Reductus can also do that, and still be in range with the indirect fire bombs that she's setting off. Being out of line of sight and near an objective, you have a nice aura that's scary for enemies, as long as you don't roll a 1, and I'm on 50% in games of rolling a 1, then you can do some mortal wounds against whatever the enemy comes close to you with. And now that grenades are not a separate thing like they were in 9th edition, where you either throw grenades like with a keyword, the same as like a pistol or a heavy weapon keyword, we don't have that anymore, so you can throw your demolition charge and set off the remote explosives in the same turn. If the enemy got within your lone operative range of 12 inches, hopefully you're out of line of sight so you can't be shot, that means you can then move up and be in range to throw the demolition charge. If you weren't, if you were like 13, 14 inches away, so you couldn't be shot because you're lone operative, the demo charge is assault, so you could advance straight up there, throw the demolition charge, and although it's once per game, unlike the Acolytes hitting on a 5+, the Reductus is hitting on a 2+. That is really cool. And before you throw that, grenade stratagem for free. Obviously you don't want to charge, not with this profile, but as soon as the enemy moves closer, then your planted explosive can detonate. You're getting a lot of boom in a very compact frame. Because of a rules commentary update, enemies deep striking near to the Reductus Sabateur no longer set off the planted explosive ability. But if the enemy wants to commit to deep striking a unit to kill her, that is probably a win for us. She is cheaper than Metamorphs, and there's no reason to scout because she can infiltrate. Perhaps a better choice overall. So you can start her on an objective, and the enemy will not want to come near to her with anything valuable because of the mortal wounds that she can cause. If you've had Genestealers remove the enemy chaff and screening units, the next unit to come close to her should be something valuable. So those are the lone operatives. For a different theme, what about mechanized Genestealer Cult? And this could be a whole army in itself. You will see the tactics for charging your forces straight at the enemy using vehicles Mad Max style. When thinking of the tanks and transports of the Genestealer Cult, I am not talking about the Brood Brothers. If you want to know which Leman Russ is the best to support this army, I have a whole video dedicated to that tank. With its points reduced, it has become a much better choice. Deploy it opposite its ideal target, and have fun. But let's begin with the Genestealer Cult's biggest tank that we have. It's still actually pretty light, but when we are the Rusted Claw style army, riding the angry road, we will either fall by the wayside or rise for Ascension Day. The Goliath Rockgrinder is okay as a tank. It has toughness 10, so melter-guns are wounding it on a 5+, much to the chagrin of the Sisters of Battle, but a 3+ save and 10 wounds are not going to keep it going for very long, if the enemy puts any kind of serious anti-tank firepower into it. But it is not designed to endure, it is designed to crush and destroy. When you charge, we have grinding clearance. So when you end a charge move, you hit an enemy, you roll 6d6 for every 4+, it's a mortal wound. But that's not the only mortal wounds we're going to be doing, because we have a very nice tank shock. The Rockgrinder will be rolling 10 dice with tank shock, and assuming that the enemy's toughness is 9 or lower, we get 2 extra dice, so that's 12 dice. For every 5+, that's another mortal wound. So we're looking at a further 4 mortal wounds on average, for 7 average in total. The tank shock itself caps out at 6, but that makes no reference to grinding clearance, so we can have 7 mortal wounds between the two things, no problem. Once it's in combat, you really want to be hitting something that's a tank, a monster, a vehicle that you want removing, a dreadnought, something like that that's been used to oppress the Genestealer Cult. Against infantry, it will grind up 3 models with a Space Marine kind of profile, an MEQ. We've been over this, what the abbreviations mean, but a tank will suffer much more because then the high strength is what we need when the Genestealer Cult are mostly an infantry-based small arms fire army, with not a great deal of anti-tank. We can of course be doing more mortal wounds to the enemies. When the Goliath Rockgrinder does get destroyed, and it is quite a light vehicle, then assuming you roll a 6, it's Deadly Demise D3. For additional anti-tank firepower, I would recommend the Heavy Mining Laser or the Heavy Seismic Cannon to be supporting your destructive capabilities. So you'll be firing 6 shots hitting on a 4+, at strength 8 -2, doing D3 damage. Perhaps the Heavy Mining Laser is better because it has the longer range that you may need for hitting the enemy vehicles before they hit you. I don't think the clearance incinerator is necessary on this vehicle. We have a lot of anti-infantry firepower with literally everything else. and all of the claws on things like the Acolytes and the Metamorphs can be quite effective at anti-infantry damage. I think you'll have to accept that the Rockgrinder, after it's done its one valiant charge, will quickly have ground its last rock, especially once your opponent sees what it has done to their prize unit. The Goliath Rockgrinder is also a transport. It can transport up to 6 models, so that is often 5 models plus a character, or just a unit of 5 models. The Metamorphs are quite a good choice because their short-range hand flamers will benefit from being closer to the enemy, and they're very squishy. Having an armoured bulk around them to keep them safe is very beneficial. However, if it is a dedicated transport, then you can still use the scout move that all of your units inside have on the transport itself. The Goliath Rockgrinder is not a dedicated transport, just a transport. You need the Goliath Truck, which is a dedicated transport, which gets the benefit of scout as long as all of the units inside of it can scout. An equally squishy unit, because it's made out of the same box, are the Acolytes. Again, hand flamers are quite useful. Being able to get close and then jump out with mining weapons gives you extra, pretty high strength attacks after the Rockgrinder has gone on grinding, but with new rules to say you can't use one-shot weapons from inside of it. Sadly, you can't be riding around throwing out demolition charges and then through some rule shenanigans getting in and out and the Goliath Rockgrinder has thrown the demolition charge but the models inside hadn't. There's now a rule to say no one-shot weapons fired from the firing deck. Aberrants, 5 Aberrants with possibly an Abominant could be brought closer to the fight or dropped off closer to an objective to hold that as a big block of meat that the enemy will have difficulty punching through. Alternatively, 5 Genestealers, as they have the speed to be able to get out before the Rockgrinder moves, advance, and then charge. As you can't normally move or charge if the transport is moved, the Genestealer's speed is what will allow them to stay safe, relatively, within the Rockgrinder, and then charge out and make a charge before the enemies had a chance to shoot them. Overwatch being the exception. So once your Metamorphs or Aberrants or Genestealers have gotten off to do their job, the Rockgrinder can be doing its own thing. The Rockgrinder is not as flashy as the Cult Limo, but it does its job. You know that the Limo was not an official model. It was kit bashed and everyone loved it, so in basically every fan index between 2nd edition and 6th edition, the Limo has appeared. But let's assume that there is no Limo available. What does Botherington-upon-Sea, now located within a desert setting, for the aesthetic, have as a replacement bus service? It has the Cult Truck. Another light vehicle, but even lighter than the Rockgrinder, to the point where grenade launchers are wounding it on a 4+. This is one of the rare vehicles that is providing a high transport capacity and fire support as a rule. Other factions have the Falcons and the Razorbacks that have a transport capacity of 6 and the same fire support rule. We get a transport capacity of 12. Fire support means that a unit that gets out can reroll wound rolls against something that the truck has scored a hit against. As there are not many shots coming out of the truck, and you might roll badly, I would have all of the truck guns fire at the same target just to make sure you get at least one hit. For the units you may want inside, a unit of Acolytes with demo charges is not a bad idea. Because we can no longer use the Tunnel Crawler's stratagem twice in a turn, this is something that lets you deploy Acolytes from Deep Strike within 3 inches, a range with which you can then use demo charges. We could previously do it twice thanks to the Nexos, but now that the rules have changed their ability, only battle tactics can be used for free or more than once per phase. However, the reroll to wound is not particularly valuable on the strength 12 demo charges, because against the majority of things you'll be wounding on 2s anyway, and the Acolytes get to reroll once to wound against enemies on objectives. Neophytes though, even 10 of them, could be a cheaper way of holding objectives in the midboard. More at like 1,000 points than 2,000 points. The rerolls to wound on their autoguns and seismic cannons and flamers and webbers for that devastating wounds ability could be quite nice at clearing enemy light infantry from an objective. 10 Metamorphs isn't bad. Gives you even more scouting. The rerolls to wound on hand flamers that are already auto-hitting could give them some actual effectiveness. I'm seeing a good use of Metamorphs in this list, especially now that they cost less than Acolytes. They could be in a truck, get out, sit on an objective, maybe with a Locus. Enemies will want to charge them to get onto the objective as they kick the Metamorphs off, and having fight first with the Locus is nice, or just having 10 Metamorphs that fight on death on a 3+ anyway is not bad for mauling the enemy as you go down. We could also put Aberrants or pure strain Genestealers into the truck, but these are combat units in a vehicle that supports shooting. The Aberrants might appreciate the extra speed to get around, but they're tough enough already without needing the extra armor in the form of a truck, and the Genestealers would use their infiltrate ability, and the devastating wounds on their claws would not be possible because the only way to get that is to include a Patriarch, and the Patriarch expressly cannot be transported in a truck. So what do we do with the truck? What's its role on the battlefield? Well, it looks like it has a pretty good role in taking infantry to an objective and helping them shoot better. When the Neophytes or Metamorphs get out to better clear the objective, that will be best. It could just drive around shooting things because it has a firing deck of 12. That means that 10 Neophytes inside can all fire. That, combined with the autocannon and the heavy stubber, is some pretty nasty anti-infantry firepower just from weight of bullets. After dropping off a unit on an objective, you could charge the enemy, not to like do anything, just to inconvenience them. And with big guns never tire, which I've explained in detail here, you could still fire your heavy stubber and your autocannon, but at -1 to hit. Or we could focus entirely on demolition charges. A similar idea to having the Neophytes move around and throw out firepower from the safety within a truck. We would do the same thing but with added fire, and you know how much I love fire. Acolytes with hand flamers, not the best weapon, but you would be going close enough to use demo charges. The demolition cache on the truck can be used over and over again. It is not one shot. The Acolytes demo charges are. Transports are doing well this edition because of their boost to their survivability compared to the previous edition and the way that they can move infantry around the board. However, we also have a vehicle that can support our infantry really well without needing to stick them in a box. The Ridgerunner. And there are 3 different ways to use the Ridgerunner. It can be a very cheap way to hold an objective and perform secondaries, or it can provide some anti-tank support that in the Genestealer Cult army is otherwise only reliably provided by demo charge Acolytes, or it can be used in a role to support those Acolytes and Neophytes. The best gun options for each are varied. So if you want to support the Neophytes and make the most use of this crossfire rule, which means that any unit shooting at that enemy target after the Ridgerunner is fired will be improving the armor penetration of their guns by 1. So making an autogun armor penetration 1 is great for clearing hordes, and making those demo charges on the Acolytes armor penetration -3 is really going to help with that anti-tank. Or really, for the profile the demo charge is, anti-anything and everything. The best way to trigger this crossfire ability will be to use the heavy mortar. It has the most shots, and as long as you have 1 hit, then the crossfire will trigger. The heavy mortar is also indirect fire and blast, improving the number of shots, and meaning you can fire it without needing to be anywhere near the enemy. To make the crossfire even better, you would support this with a survey auger that will give friendly Genestealer Cult units ignores cover against the target unit. This is of course assuming that they're not using the Ascension Day detachment, the only one currently available to us, which provides ignores cover when your unit deploys from deep strike. But if you were firing this at a unit of heavy infantry, like Terminators, it could nicely support our other tanks like the Rockgrinder firing its massive laser, which also has blast, and has the armor penetration that the Terminators would be getting the benefit of cover. Best ignore that. So if you want to support your other Genestealer Cult units, heavy mortar, and the auger. If you want to do some anti-tank support, then either the Achilles missile launcher or the heavy mining laser. I prefer the heavy mining laser, as its profile continues to be better than the missiles, even though the missiles are more reliable looking, with a flat 3 attacks rather than D3, and a flat 3 damage rather than D6 +1. To make your anti-tank shots even more likely to hit, you want to support that with the spotter, so that your ballistic skill is improved to 3+. Heavy mining laser and spotter for anti-tank style. The third way to use the Ridgerunner is to just go after objectives. The speed of the Ridgerunner at 12 inches and the ability to scout 9 inches means you can get onto objectives very quickly. Once you're there, you just need to survive. So you'll want to be out of line of sight, and if you're unlucky enough to be spotted, then you're going to need the flare launcher, so you have the smoke keyword, which allows you to use the smoke screen stratagem. This gives you the benefit of cover and stealth. So it's -1 for enemies to shoot you, and assuming they have an armor penetration of at least 1, you'll be getting a better save. The reason we have to choose smoke screen is because we can't use one with the darkness on vehicles. Now, because this is going to be hiding out of line of sight or rushing into the corners for secondary objectives and things like that, you will want the mortar, because that can be used indirectly while you're hiding out of line of sight, and it has the longest range if you were the furthest back in your own table corners. So if you have already built your Ridgerunner, rather than choosing to build it to match one of these 3 tactics, choose the tactic that matches how you've built it. I really like this vehicle because all of the options available are quite good. It can just take some matching up to realise how to use that particular build of the vehicle. This is one of the few units where you can have 3 in the army, the maximum number allowed, and they all do different things. But for this mechanised list that's mostly going to be vehicles, I would make sure you have at least 1 to be holding objectives and fulfilling the requirements of secondary objectives. Anytime it's not completing a secondary objective and can still fire, that heavy mortar can be doing double duty because crossfire will still be activating when it's fired. It is possible to have an entirely mechanised, really fast Genestealer Cult army, but you need a warlord that's going to reflect that. So here is the Jackal Alphus. You can deploy the bike alone. A surprising number of people did not know that that was something you can do. Adding a character to a unit is optional, something you can do. If you look at the Leviathan box set, you can see that Captain Flappy Bat is all alone and doesn't get the lone operative ability. Same for other Space Marine characters, only one of which is a lone operative. This 60-point model can be quite fast for moving around and performing secondary objective actions or holding primary objectives as long as it's not within line of sight of the enemy. That's cheaper than any infantry unit the Genestealer Cult have without turning to Brood Brothers. Their weakness then is indirect fire. If the enemy has any kind of indirect fire, then the biker is done for. Imperial Guard mortar teams are quite common. It is also polite to tell your opponent that this model does not have lone operative. It is rare for people to know every unit from every codex, so do let them know out of fairness. When they see you deploy it alone, they will assume that this sniper is a lone operative. The Jackal Alphus is one of the first units that you should have fire in your army because it has target priority. After the Jackal Alphus and its unit, assuming you put the Alphus in a unit, which you probably should, once they're fired, everything else that fires at the same target gets to reroll a hit roll of 1. So you can see how you can stack the Jackal Alphus and the Ridgerunner to get a surprising amount of effective firepower piled on one enemy unit. And I would also like to point out that this save here is one of the few things from the index errors that has not been corrected. So if you're doing rules as written, which I know so many people love to do, the Jackal Alphus only passes an armor save if you roll a 5. A 6 technically does not save her. But I think we all know rules as intended. This is a 5+ save. So the Jackal Alphus will be wanting to avoid firepower either way, and that's where Master Outrider is useful. In your shooting phase, after the unit is fired, if it's not within engagement range, you can move it 6 inches. So it's got a shoot and scoot mechanic, a lot like, say, Eldar Rangers. This will let the Jackal Alphus move out, fire at what you want, use the target priority, then hide again so it can avoid at least direct fire, if not indirect fire. So if you're doing this all mechanized Genestealer Cult list, it's not the worst idea to have a Jackal Alphus in a unit of Jackals, and then another Jackal Alphus by themselves as a very cheap way to hold objectives and provide a little bit of support to the rest of the army. Just watch out for Overwatch when you do poke your head out. Now this Master Outrider ability, as it's something that the Jackal Alphus can do, so can the unit that the Jackal Alphus has joined. It's not restricted to the model being alone. And joining a unit of Atalan Jackals, they all have Scout 9 inches. The Jackals come in squads of either 5 or 10, and we'll get on to a bit later as to which one is better. Any number of Jackals can replace their close combat weapon with a power weapon, and since it can be done for free now, there's no extra points on it, yes, give them all power weapons. It's the same points, just assume they have their power weapon hidden in a bag at the back of the model. These are one of the more weird units of the Genestealer Cult, but that doesn't mean they're not fun. They are mostly driving around on their bikes, firing 2 pistols, and just somehow also managing to coordinate it to keep their bike up. 1 in every 4 Jackals can have a grenade launcher instead of their pistols, and a unit will include either 4 Jackals or 8 because 1 or 2 of them are the wolf quads. And yes, the grenade launcher is objectively better than 2 pistol shots. The only real weapons choices come on the Atalan wolf quads. They will have to have a close combat weapon, they can't switch it out for a power weapon. You need to not forget that they also have the small arms, so when everything else is firing their pistols, they could fire their pistols too, but the only time you're going to want to do that is if you're in close combat with the enemy and it's your shooting phase. Otherwise, you either fire the guns or the pistols. Its main weapon choice are either a heavy stubber, Atalan incinerator, or a mining laser. I don't hate any of them. Because you're going to be needing to get close to the enemy to fire any of your guns before you charge into combat, a 12-inch range incinerator isn't the worst and it auto hits. The heavy stubber is going to be firing 6 shots at the same range. Only 3 of them will hit, probably. It has a longer range if you need it, but probably the incinerator is better. If you want the unit to be able to have a go at anti-tank, the grenade launchers have a crack version, and you could have the wolf quad with a mining laser. It's only one shot, hitting on a 4+, so you are probably going to miss, but if you do hit, there is a chance to do some damage to an enemy vehicle. Whichever one you like is totally fine, but they have a more important way of doing damage than any of these weapons that they're equipped with. A key way that you can do a lot of damage is with their demolition run. So now the demolition run is once per battle round. And unlike the demolition charges of the Acolytes, which is you throw one demolition charge per model, this just has to be within range of the unit. 6-inch range, and then the mortal wounds happen. I have a visual to explain how this would work when you have a string of bikers and only one of them is within the 6-inch range to throw the grenades.
Hot potato, 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 hot potato.
Yep. That's how it works. And they sing that every time. So the demolition run lets you do about 5 mortal wounds. 5.5 on average if you have the Jackal Alphus in the unit, because that is the model in the unit, and you roll a d6 for every model in the Jackal unit. If you need more help understanding how abilities and things work with characters attached to units and units going with characters, I have a video that explains it that has had a lot of positive feedback. The issue with the Atalan Jackals, as soon as you take any casualties, that is reduced. As it's not a battle line unit, this unit of Atalan Jackals will only come back on a 5+ or a 4+ if they got wiped out in the first or second battle round, and when you come back, you need to be wholly within 9 inches of the battlefield edge. It's 9 inches, as that was changed in September, and you need to have the whole unit wholly within 3 inches of a cult ambush marker, which is kind of difficult for a squad of 10. So a unit of 5 may be better than the bigger unit of 10, assuming that you can trust in your ability to roll a 5+, but it is still possible to get all 10, even with their chunky wolf quad bases, around a cult ambush marker. Remember, we're not having to be in range of a single point. It expects you to use a 32mm token, like the ones you got in the 8th edition codex. I have my own version from 2nd edition, which is basically the exact same thing. These have been around for a while, so you have a little bit more space than you would expect. Like how adding 2 inches to the size of pizza is a lot more pizza. And it is 3 inches from the edge of the token, not 3 inches from the center of the token. So it isn't a 6-inch diameter, it's more like 7.6 inches. And you can deploy on top of the token. It's only objective markers that you can't end a move or deploy on top of. Unless you're playing in tournaments, then that particular rule for objective markers just goes away. Welcome to Genestealer Cult! I hope you studied further maths at your 6th form, high school, scholia progenium. So a reason to take them in squads of 5 is it's less of a headache. And the image showing how it can be done, thanks to cracking your bases for the visual. So you can be entirely within 6 inches of the token and within 9 inches of the board edge, as long as there's no terrain being an inconvenience. And it really limits where you can put your cult ambush marker, but something you could do is put it sort of near to the board edge, and then if you wanted, use a Nexos to move a cult ambush marker closer to the board edge, so that you could have the Atalan Jackals come from a different token than the one that your opponent thought they were going to come from. It's not really worth it, but it's something you could do. So the new cult ambush ability has made it more difficult to take 10 Atalan Jackals. You can still fit 20 Neophytes quite nicely, because remember, there's even more to this where you need to have every model more than 9 inches from the enemy. So these tokens you're putting near to the board edge want to be at least 12 inches from where you think the enemy are going to be able to reach. Otherwise, you're just not able to set up the unit again, and they're destroyed, despite you heroically being able to roll a 5+ to return the unit to the field. This whole mechanized army is going to be very fast, it is going to be able to scout, depending on how many Metamorphs you include, and it is going to be able to get around the board very quickly to complete any secondary objectives. But unfortunately, unlike a horde of infantry, you're not getting as many units, and you're not going to be able to get as many units back unless you're going to be going for a lot of Acolytes and Neophytes inside your trucks. I don't much like the cult ambush rule. It can make the game take longer than it needs to. If you're losing, getting more models back a turn later and far out of position isn't going to swing the game back for you. And if you're winning already, it just looks really oppressive. A lot of you responded to my community polls to say, I don't get many units back from cult ambush. So as an army rule, it is not the best. So in a mechanized Genestealer Cult list, it is okay to get support from elsewhere, where we don't get to roll the cult ambush. Hopefully there will be a detachment in the upcoming Genestealer Cult Codex with a focus on the speed in vehicles, so that a speed-only list will work. If and when there is one of those, it will be its own video. But we have more than just these vehicles. we have all the vehicles and units of the Imperial Guard to support us. Any analysis of the Genestealer Cult would not be complete without looking at their allies, the Brood Brothers. Brood Brothers are not hybrids themselves. They're the parents or siblings of hybrids, or people who have been hypnotized to join the cult. But just because they don't share the genetic lineage of the Patriarch doesn't mean they're any less loyal to the cause. In-game, the Genestealer Cult can't have Imperial agents because we're not using an army where every single unit has the Imperial keyword, unless we pull some shenanigans. But we don't need agents anyway. You don't want a Vindicare assassin. We already have 2 Vindicare assassins at home. Welcome to the Hive Cult. Let's focus hard on getting that 25% of our forces to be Brood Brothers. Let's look at one of the best units to include. We can't have epic heroes as Brood Brothers, so we'll be skipping over them. I swear I haven't seen this guy before. But we don't need him. So no epic heroes, no commissars, no ogrins, no rattlings, no regimental support staff, no aircraft, no Tempestus Scions, but we can have the very similar Kazakin as an elite guard of sorts for the Patriarch, the Brood Father, the Messiah, the one... Okay, let's not get carried away. What are some of the best and most thematic units to add to the cult? Infantry. Infantry squads can hold objectives. The infantry squads get the benefit of cover while they're there. They can provide a las cannon or a mortar, but there are better units to choose. Cadians and Kriegsmen. Now you seem surprised. We can now take these units. We couldn't in 9th edition, so if you had discounted them, look again at the Brood Brothers rule. We can have Cadians and members of the Death Corps of Krieg. At 1,000 points or less, I think Cadians are a must. At 1,000 points you have 4 or 5 objectives, far less troops, but a similar number of objectives to 2,000 points. So any unit with this sticky objective type rule is very valuable. Start a unit of 10 of them on your home objective, it becomes sticky. Then you can hold it with 10 Neophytes to generate more command points, and if you really are scared of Deep Strike at that game size, also a Clamavus, but really just the 10 Neophytes. Even if they're all shot to death by Deep Strike or outflank or indirect fire, it is still your objective, because the Cadian Brood Brothers have touched it. Then the Neophytes will come back as a blip, probably, and can hold that objective again, while the Cadians have moved on to touch another objective in the midboard. At 2,000 points, it is not as necessary to have the Cadians. We have enough bodies at 2,000 points between our Acolytes, Neophytes, Metamorphs, vehicles, whatever you want, to hold those objectives. If you wanted to include a larger squad, or really try and keep your 10 men alive, you could add a Psyker. I think it's better than the Genestealer Cult Magus. Rather than having a chance of turning off the enemy shooting, we get a 4+ invulnerable save. As long as you don't roll a 1. Incidentally, I've rolled a 1 every time in a game when I've been trying to use them, but in theory, this works. And it will keep your Cadians alive longer to touch more objectives. So while the Genestealers and units of infiltrating Aberrants using enhancements are tying up the enemy, these Cadians can go around touching all the objectives. Remember that Cadians are just people, they don't need to be sended from people from the planet of Cadia. Anyone trained in the Cadian style is also considered to be a Cadian, at least as far as game rules are concerned. You could have members of the Death Corps of Krieg if you want. With a Medipack, which they can now take, they have the regeneration ability. So, very similar to Neophytes, but we have that, of course, on the Neophytes with their banner. And Neophytes can return as a full unit with Call Ambush. You would be swapping mining lasers and seismic cannons for plasma guns and melter guns. A little cheaper than Neophytes, it's 130 for 20 Krieg, or 180 for 20 Neophytes. And 20 is a very good number to have. The Death Corps of Krieg could add in a Marshal to give Feel No Pain, or they could add in that Primaris Psyker. And when I'm saying Primaris Psyker, I mean this model, not a Primaris Space Marine Psyker. Unlike with the Battle Sisters where a 4+ invulnerable save of an Imagifier is not great because you'll still suffer against AP 0 and AP -1, a 4+ invulnerable save will always be an improvement to the save of the Krieg. Unfortunately, it only works against shooting attacks, and you need to not roll a 1. The Krieg can thematically suit the Genestealer Cult, but when you're adding 20 Kriegers and a character, you're at the same points level as a Neophyte blob. And while both units have the ability to regenerate models, the whole unit of Neophytes can return on a 4+, or a 3+ if it's one of the first 2 battle rounds. With no access to the Astra Militarum reinforcement stratagem, the Krieg blob just won't be coming back. So it's better to have the Neophytes. The third special kind of infantry squad are the Catachans. they can scout. And so if you want a mechanized list that's all about scouting, where everything scouts, maybe you want a chimera with a bunch of muscular brood brothers scouting up to support your Metamorphs in a truck. But the Metamorphs are better. You can have more flamers with the Metamorphs, and then you can come back on a 5+, or 4+ if it's the first 2 battle rounds. The Metamorphs also have a much better combat ability than the Catachans, and they can use all of the Genestealer Cult stratagems. The Catachans can't. So I think we have in our army enough scouting and deep striking and infiltrating already, so we don't need any more from the Brood Brothers. But if you want a unified army like that, it could be thematic. If you want a better unit that can scout, and thematically fits the Genestealer Cult as their kind of elite bodyguard of sorts, Kazakin. Kazakin can scout, and so you can put them in a chimera, that is a dedicated transport, but if they had an officer, then the chimera couldn't scout because not every model in that unit has the scout ability. And as a Genestealer Cult player, you wouldn't want an officer because Brood Brothers can't use the voice of command ability. Besides, if I understand it right, and I have triple checked, Kazakin can be issued an order even if they don't have access to orders. Their unit rule lets them have an order to affect the unit until the start of your next command phase. They don't have the faction ability voice of command, but they can still use orders. So as Brood Brothers, they can still be using an order, even though we as Genestealer Cult don't have access to voice of command. So which order is best? They are all good depending on what you need. If you scouted at the start and you want to get onto an objective to complete a secondary objective in the first turn, move, move, move. If you were in combat, fix bayonets. If your squad has 2 hotshot volley guns and 2 plasma guns, and you are shooting like infantry, fire by rank. Then all of those weapons get an extra shot. Or if you have melter guns and grenade launchers because you're hunting vehicles and monsters, choose take aim for +1 ballistic skill. This is something that stacks with any +1 to hits that you may have, but we can't get better than hitting on a 2. If you find that you are the only unit in an area and you need to hold an objective, get a 3+ save with take cover. If you're holding an objective and you're below half strength, or there's a horde of Gretchen approaching, duty and honor to have a better chance to pass battle shock and hold that objective against the oncoming horde. So hotshot volley guns plus plasma guns is one pairing, melter guns and grenade launchers is the other pairing because then you get strength 9. So lighter vehicles, you're winning on a 4+. Heavier vehicles, regardless of what you use, it's a 5+, but the melter gun has the armor penetration, the grenade launcher has the range, and can be used against infantry as well. It's a maximum of 2 of each gun in the squad of 10. The melter mine is nice to use once per game. Just, if you have it, use it as soon as you can. If you get charged, use it at the start of the fight phase because you are unlikely to survive against whatever's hitting you. Or if you would survive because you're being attacked by that horde of Gretchen, use it to free yourself up quicker and get back to proper fighting. Don't save it all in the hope that a vehicle will pass by. And I think that you are better off keeping a hotshot lasgun instead of swapping that for the mine. If you like the idea of Kazakin, but you don't want to use Kazakin, try the Legends Death Corps Grenadiers instead. They cost 10 points more, they can't use the volley gun, but they get the free grenade strat every turn, which will be better than the mine because you can use the grenades every turn, and they do an average of 3 mortal wounds. The mine is doing 2 or 4 against a vehicle, but only once per game. So that covers our lack of heavy infantry that isn't an aberrant. Heavy infantry with guns. But we also would like some cheap heavy weapons, so we can get a heavy weapons team. We need las cannons, auto cannons are good, but then they need to be out in the open where they can be shot back at. Mortar teams are popular because of indirect fire, but they work better with Imperial Guard because then the Bone Soldiers rule kicks in. With the mortars, you get your indirect fire and you can hold a home objective, probably alongside some Neophytes. Still, they can get some great support with a Sentinel. You don't replace any keywords in the current 10th edition version of Brood Brothers, so things like Daring Recon on the Scout Sentinel will still work with the Brood Brothers in the Genestealer Cult. It needs units that have the Astra Militarum keyword in your army, and if you have a heavy weapon team, that has the Astra Militarum keyword. So Scout Sentinels can still help your mortars, and that is a nice cheap pairing. The Armored Sentinel is valuable and it's 70 points relatively cheap anti-tank. You can get a Hunter Killer Missile and a las cannon on it, and that makes it even better at its job of killing monsters and vehicles. We need as much anti-tank as we can get outside of demo charges. If they get nerfed again, or go way up in points again, we need all of the alternative anti-tank we can get our 3-clawed hands on. And this is anti-tank at range. You can also have the Sentinel Powerlifter in Legends. That does provide some mortal wounds on the charge and 3 strength 10 attacks. But for an extra 20 points, you can have an Abominant with 3 strength 12 attacks. And if you don't mind Legends, For 50 points, that is cheaper than a heavy weapons team, you can have a heavy quad launcher team. It gives indirect fire and it pins the enemy, not reducing their movement, but making them -1 to hit. So even if you don't kill them, and you're firing at something you can't really hurt, you can still hinder them, especially a unit that's putting out a lot of shots. It's a very good choice, and it has the same ability as the Griffin Mortar Carrier, but at half the price. And this too will work with the Scout Sentinel's ability. A Field Ordnance Battery would provide more of a punch, but it isn't so great at 120 points. You could have 2 Bombast Field Guns, but part of their utility is lost because the Rearm Reload Fire is not usable because we can't issue orders to them. The bigger boom comes in the form of the Basilisk. It is more survivable in the weapons team, doesn't need line of sight, and like mortars, benefits from the Sentinel's reroll of 1 and ignoring the hit penalty for indirect fire. The enemy will still get the benefit of cover as usual from indirect fire, but the -2 AP will help mitigate that. I do recommend the Basilisk, or its legend counterpart with no tracks. You probably weren't going to move the vehicle anyway. But with the tracks, it can move on to empty objectives, and as a vehicle rather than a fortification, it can keep doing its job of shooting massive Strength 8 blast shells even if the enemy are attacking it in close combat. With the profile of the Earthshaker cannon, some of you may be tempted to try firing it at vehicles, but it does far better targeting heavy infantry. The Strength 8 and Damage 2 is perfect for killing Space Marines. Devastator squads, Desolation Marines that have their own indirect fire need to be put down. Even some of the infantry with higher toughness like the Gravis Marines and the Death Guard Terminators. Those Death Guard no longer have an army rule to ignore movement penalties. So changing their movement from 4 inches to movement 2 inches with the Earthshaker round ability will make them very sad, even if you don't kill any of them with the shot itself. This is such a valuable unit for the cult. The enemy will have some rapid response units that can get to our ambush markers or counterattack our weak deep striking units. This stops them to some degree. Your opponent may also have some big death block, like 10 Deathwing Terminators or Necron Lich Guard or Eldar Wraith Guard. Keeping those units slow means that they can't respond while you hit other units on the other side of the board with your 10 Acolytes with demolition charges and your Neophytes firing a lot of shots. That way you'll be able to piecemeal kill off the other units in their army without having to deal with the scariest enemy unit, and that is very much on theme for the Genestealer Cult style of play. Including 1 Basilisk for every 1,000 points in your army is my recommendation. Or, because it's the ability that's the most important thing on the Basilisk, we can go even cheaper and get an Earthshaker Carriage Battery. It has tiny wheels, but it doesn't need to move that much. We're using it for the cannon to do damage and the -2 movement ability. It doesn't matter that it's not going to hold up as well, it's staying out of line of sight. So even for Imperial Guard players, the Earthshaker Carriage Battery in the Forge World rules is superior to the Basilisk because it's the same gun, but cheaper. It's a relatively small points investment and you get a lot from it. That's worth considering. And we don't need to look at the Tank Commander orders for the Basilisk because we can't use them. And the Tank Commander wants to be speeding up into the fight, not hanging back while he's in a tank. We can't have officers and units with the Commissar keyword, but we can have the Death Rider Commissar, as that doesn't have the Commissar keyword, just Death Rider Commissar. It probably should have the separate keyword Commissar, but we probably wouldn't want it anyway. We can't use its orders, and if you were playing Imperial Guard, the Death Rider Commander is better for providing a plain order instead of being limited as to which order. Plus, then the whole unit can infiltrate. In the Genestealer Cult, this could be another unit deploying alongside the Patriarch and the Genestealers, tying up dangerous enemies in turn 1 and stopping one of their flanks from shooting. The devastating wounds from the Death Rider Commander is only on his own lance and only when he charges. It's not an ability for the unit. This man is no Chaplain Cassius. But the Death Riders are very similar in profile and role to the Genestealers, but the Patriarch does give them all devastating wounds. The Genestealers cost a little bit more, but get an extra point of armor penetration, and they hit on 2+ rather than 3+, and Genestealers can advance and charge. Plus, pure strain Genestealers can use all of the stratagems that the Death Riders can't. You just need the Genestealer Cult faction keyword. The Death Riders are able to provide 50 Strength 4 attacks for 140 points, with 30 of their attacks getting +1 to wound if they charge from the Lance ability. But they are inferior to Rough Riders. The Rough Riders have versatility. The Strength 4 attacks of the Death Riders will do well against hordes, but the Atalan Rough Riders can put out D6 Strength 4 Lance attacks, averaging 55 attacks for a unit of 10, but without the -1 AP. I am including the mounts attacks in that for simplicity. And that is if you don't go for the Gold Lance, which is strength 6 minus 2 AP, 2 damage. The Rough Riders can also go after vehicles and heavily armored enemies, which the Death Riders can't. The Melter Tip is only 1 attack, but with Lance on the charge, they are wounding the biggest tanks on a 4+. Where is that for the Battle Sisters? The Gold Lance is also wounding any tank or monster with toughness less than 12 on a 4+. That's just because of its strength plus lance. It doesn't have anti-vehicle, anti-monster. And before the game, you don't need to choose if a model has a Melter Tip or a Frag Tip. They can change as they are needed. Death Riders are fixed in the role of either tying up the enemy or fighting hordes. Rough Riders can do either, plus attack vehicles. Would you want them in a Genestealer Cult army? Well, if you don't think that your world or colony would have bikes, they make a nice alternative to the Jackal bikes, and I can see the utility of quickly charging enemy vehicles, or falling back from infantry and charging enemy vehicles with their Horsemaster's skill, and I don't think 4 Melter Lance attacks and a Gold Lance would do enough if they're only fielded in a squad of 5. The Atalan Rough Riders are a maybe, down to personal preference. Maybe use the Death Rider models because their horses have claws and you could think of them as horseborn Genestealers ridden by Brood Brothers. That's thematic. Other fast options include transports. Now the transports that we get from the Brood Brothers will have to have an Astra Militarum unit inside. You can't put Neophytes in a Chimera. Now if we take the Taurox Prime, which is painted for the Tempestus, and can have Tempestus units inside, but it doesn't have the Tempestus keyword, we can have it, but it will explode immediately as per the dedicated transport rules, unless you put a unit inside. In this case, the only units could ever go inside are characters that go by themselves. Not a great choice when you will want your characters in units to support them, if you're including Imperial Guard characters at all. The Taurox, the regular Taurox, could speed some Cadians onto an objective with its advance and disembark ability. The troops can then sticky that objective while the Taurox blocks enemies from easily reaching the troops. And you get a twin autocannon in the bargain for 65 points. When supporting a Genestealer Cult mechanized army, this is a better choice than a Chimera, because the Chimera's special rule is all about using orders even while inside a transport, something that just doesn't benefit the Genestealer Cult. You could put your Kazakin inside the Taurox, and then they won't be able to use the ability to give themselves an order. That works from reserves, because you can use abilities while in reserves, but it won't work while within a transport. They could scout and then have the Taurox advance and then get out in the first turn. That will get them well up the board to almost be within the enemy's deployment zone. And in some missions like Crusade games, you will be in the deployment zone, and the enemy won't be expecting a close range volley of AP-1 guns coming out of a Genestealer Cult army. The Taurox is worth considering, but let's look at bigger tanks. Now you could use the Hydra, because if we can't have aircraft, because there are none in our roster and we can't use the Brood Brothers aircraft, then no one can have aircraft. But really, no one is using them anyway. It doesn't have to be an aircraft though. It's anything with the fly keyword. So if you have lots of targets from your opponent who's taking Drukhari with a lot of raiders, or Eldari with the Falcons and all of their vehicles, they have the fly keywords, and if you're facing Tau, not only do their vehicles have the fly keyword, all of their battle suits do as well. If it sounds weird to be firing an anti-aircraft gun at a tank, historically, flak anti-air guns were also used as anti-tank weapons, and it can damage light vehicles like Chimeras. Strength 9 is exactly the same as what Melter guns have. And these are twin-linked, so you're re-rolling the wound roll as well. Not that you're likely to need to if you're firing against something with the fly keyword, because anti-fly 2+ means you wound on a 2+, as well as getting to reroll the hit roll because of the flak battery special rule. And if there is a bigger vehicle, we do also get one hunter killer missile. It's only one shot and it hits on a 4, so it might do damage. You may not want it at all in your list, but it's important to know that it's here if needed. Now let's talk about a real tank. Ah, here we are. The Cyclops Demolition Vehicle. It's actually really small. The Cyclops Demolition Vehicle is a great way to round out an army with 25 points left. It shows that we don't need to wait for the Tyranid Spore Mines to come when we can make our own with basically the same rules. And this is very thematic for the insurgency rebels of the Genestealer Cult. Don't even risk a wave of cultists, just send in automated bombs, pilot them remotely, and because it's likely to blow up even when destroyed from a distance, its deadly demise activating on a 4+ instead of a 6+, having it arrive from reserves to hit the enemy unit in the flank is a better idea. The Cyclops can operate alone and doesn't need orders, which we don't have access to, from the Imperial Guard officers, so it will work well for the cult. A slightly bigger tank is the Hellhound. We don't need to concern ourselves with orders to improve the chances to hit when we're using torrent weapons. The tank is cheap and just got cheaper in the April 2024 points update. It's tough enough that melter guns need a 5 to wound it. The Chem Cannon or the Inferno Cannon are the weapons I prefer. Then we don't need to be concerned at all about ballistic skill, which is average. For the melter shots, it can have a multi-melter on the front. If you want anti-tank, there are better weapons with higher strength on other tanks, like the Leman Russ. What we want is auto-hitting weapons with a good range to make use of the ability that denies the enemy cover. Now the ability, since it's a debuff to the enemy unit instead of an Astra Militarum keyword buff, it will help all of your units instead of just the Brood Brothers. So that's unlike the Scout Sentinel, which specifies Astra Militarum, or the Exterminator Russ, which specifies Astra Militarum. This is a targeted debuff to the enemy. Also notably, this ability is triggered on any of its weapons. That's why I like the 18-inch range, and we're not bothered about the 12-inch range on the Heavy Flamer. That can be a multi-melter on the front. So you could put a Heavy Bolter on the front, but I don't want to risk rolling 3 misses, even though I would have a nice 36-inch range. This is why I want the torrent weapons. They're gonna hit. Ignore cover is important for a lot of weapons that the Genestealer Cult carry that are just making it to armor penetration -1 or can be made armor penetration -1 with the Ridge Runner. That would get ignored if the enemy has cover. I know that in the Ascension Day detachment our units have ignores cover when coming from reserve, but that's going to be once or twice per game for the unit. The Hellhound also lets all of our Genestealer Cult vehicles ignore cover. The Ascension Day detachment is never going to make that happen. So the Hellhound is a very good choice for a mechanized Genestealer Cult list with a lot of tanks. Let's think of the actual big tanks. The really big tanks. What if we want a big cannon to corpsify some Infernus Marines? A squad of 10 or 2 squads of 5 is very scary for the Genestealer Cult and gives massive board denial to Deep Strike because of their auto-hitting Overwatch. We can use the Basilisk. That has indirect fire and is a very good choice for anti-marines. But what if we want to go bigger? If you've ever looked at the Leman Russ Nova Cannon before and laughed, say hello to its big sibling, the Hellhammer. Its gun has a decent range at 30 inches and 4d6 shots, with blast. So that's giving you an average, against a squad of 10, 16 shots. 8 of them will hit, roughly 6 of them will wound, and you'll kill 3 Marines. Okay, it's not that amazing, but it's cool to roll that many dice. And it comes with a Demolisher Cannon too, so you don't even need to worry about having a Leman Russ when one of the best guns is integrated right there, and can kill another 2 Marines. Or provide anti-tank firepower, and we do want anti-tank firepower, to start hitting enemy vehicles and monsters. The Baneblade itself used to cost too many points for a Brood Brothers list at 2,000 points, until the September points changes made it 480 points. Just the right size to fit into a 2,000 point list. So we can have a Baneblade, and they are the most common model of super heavy to see in casual play. It has an up-modeled battle cannon with 3d6 shots, massive range, and strength 12 means it's wounding infantry like the Terminators it should be going for on a 2+, and that damage 3 will kill most Terminators. It also has the Rolling Fortress rule, which means that you can use it to get the benefit of cover, but only on Astra Militarum Brood Brothers units, and at 2,000 points you only have 20 points left for other Brood Brothers units, so its special rule is not going to be very useful to us, unless you're playing a 3,000 point Onslaught or Apocalypse size game. So there may be a better big tank to use. And it really is fun to put a whopping great tank on the table and grin, knowing that in 10th edition, you are very much supported to have big tanks. If you're having trouble with the enemy big tanks, like Land Raiders coming up with their cargo safe from your demo charges, then they spill out a bunch of Terminators or something similarly nasty straight into your Acolytes before they can use their once per game weapon, then have a Shadow Sword. This is the best chance you have of killing a Land Raider in one shot. You're wounding on 2s, and with -5 AP, it will not get a save. As soon as you get 2 of its damaged 12 shots through, that Land Raider is done. And with devastating wounds against vehicles and D3 +1 shots, odds are you will destroy it in one shot. The super heavy tanks are not as viable in tournaments right now because of their often prescriptive terrain being tightly packed, which makes moving the super heavy very predictable, but in casual games, this can be a lot of fun. Most armies, including Genestealer Cult, lack the power to destroy vehicles. This fixes the problem, and at 440 points is the cheapest super heavy. The Bane Sword and the Doom Hammer are also viable for destroying vehicles, but neither of them wound on a 2+ with -5 AP, and the Bane Sword has a habit of blowing up enemies with deadly demise and hurting your own troops that were too close. The Rogel Dawn tank is just too expensive to fit into 1000 points because it costs 260 points, and we can only have a quarter of our points spent on Brood Brothers. But even at 2000 points, I prefer the Leman Russ Demolisher and a Scout Sentinel to spot for the tank and the rest of the Brood Brothers in the army, and be a distraction, and scout, and complete secondary objectives. I have been running the Shadow Sword because it costs 440 points, which leaves 60 points for Cadians with sticky objectives. That's not as necessary at the 2000 points you would need to be playing at to include the Shadow Sword. Or have a heavy weapon squad, or have a Scout Sentinel so that the massive cannon, which is heavy, so +1 to hit if it's stationary, that can hit on 3s, re-rolling 1s. There is nothing more satisfying than playing against Imperial Guard and rolling up with a bigger tank than them. A tank that you nicked from their garage. Well, a warm hug from someone you love that you haven't seen in a long time is probably more satisfying, but having a big tank is up there. As for which Leman Russ is best, now the Nova Cannon looks nice for the shots, probably more shots than the Executioner for the loss of only 1 AP, but it gets ignore cover. The Tank Commander is thematic for the Genestealer Cult. Shoot once on death. Go down hard for the Patriarch. Fight to the last breath, my brethren. Sorry. Getting carried away again. Now it's time to bring it all together. The meta from early in the edition was lots of Acolytes and Neophytes, and you can still go that route because the Ascension Day detachment has stratagems that go further when used on battle line units, the Acolytes and the Neophytes. Even using another detachment, codex pending, the army special rule gives +1 to battle line units to return by cult ambush. So if you fill your army with Neophytes and Acolytes, that will still work. Focus on the core of the army. So a list like this, under the April 2024 points values, this is the kind of list we've had since the start of the edition. It gives you the bodies. The Ridgerunner makes the Acolytes or Neophyte bullets better with the crossfire rule. We have bombs to blow up the enemy from a lot of Saboteurs and Acolytes, and the Basilisk Earthshaker Carriage Battery hands out debuffs to the enemy. This is a fine list. Here's a competitive list that I've used to great effect, and it has a range of units. It shows off all of the tactics I've talked about and that you have patiently listened to over the last 2.5 hours. Thank you for that. I talk really fast and I don't think many people could cope with me going on faster than 1 speed. I do switch out units often on my 2000 point competitive list. Maybe I could add in a Sanctus with a knife or one with a sniper rifle instead of the enhancement on the Locus and the Nexus. Or I could change 5 Genestealers for a Kelermorph to pop up and complete actions, or that Sanctus to do the same thing and have a better chance of assassinating the enemy characters. I could swap the Sentinel for a heavy weapons team. There are a lot of changes to be made depending on your collection, and it doesn't have to be exactly like this. Not everyone likes to include the Patriarch, but their claws can cut through heroes if you use the Epic Duel stratagem, and the Genestealers get the damage that their claws deserve. With the Primus, you deploy units on the table, your opponent sets up to counter them, and then you can take them off the table to go elsewhere or underground. The rerolls are good, but I find 1 Primus is enough. After that, we're only using one of the 2 abilities of the character. Most other people disagree and have many Primuses. Many of them. By infiltrating the Abominant and Aberrants with the enhancement, along with all of the Genestealers, this puts pressure on the enemy immediately. It keeps them in their own deployment zone, while the infiltrating Reductus Sabateur and the scouting Scout Sentinel and Ridgerunner can capture objectives in the middle. So why do I have 5 Aberrants, not 10 Aberrants? Common question. Well, 5 does the job well enough against anything that isn't a tank, and against the tanks, the Abominant is here with a strength 12 hammer. If you have 10 Aberrants, that's a lot of points to sink into something that could be tied up with chaff. I want them to be difficult to remove, but not to the point where you can ignore them and I have lost a lot of value. Because Aberrants are expensive and slow. So in the first turn, as the enemy struggles to break out of their deployment zone, turn 2 hits them with 20 Neophytes and Acolytes. This is where we throw all of our stratagems at them. Perfect Ambush is for free on the Neophytes because of the Nexus. The Tunnel Crawlers on the Acolytes can strike instantly with the demolition charges. So the enemy is slow, injured, discombobulated, and we have the objectives. All the while, 10 Neophytes are on the home objective generating command points, and then, as the enemy thinks they've gone through the worst of it, and they have, Here rolls in Druzhnik, my shadow sword to blow away their vehicles and plant its massive Objective Control 8 bulk on an objective. Victory is inevitable. Ascension Day awaits. The best players know their army. I know this army list very well. Practicing the tactics you have learnt in this video will make you better at playing as the Genestealer Cult. Just throwing this list onto the table will not. I have given you a start from which you can play. Now this is a 2,000 point list. If you want to know more about how to play at 1,000 points, which has totally different tactics with fewer enemies on the board, or since a common question I get is, when this, but for Sisters of Battle, I've already done a long video on the Adeptus Sororitas. Sisters always want to get in there, but the Genestealer Cult players can wait for generations. My darlings and viewers, subscribe and thank you for watching to the end of the Imperium